Chapter 1. The Eagle's Gambit. The morning mist clung to the valley of Rivendell as autumn's grip tightened on Middle-earth. In the great hall where the council had gathered, voices rose and fell like the ebb and flow of a troubled sea. Frodo sat small and pale among the great figures of the age, the weight of the golden ring heavy in his pocket, heavier still upon his heart. "The ring cannot be wielded by any of us," Gandalf declared, his grey eyes stern beneath bushy brows. "That is not the path we must take. The very desire to use the ring's power corrupts. Look how it has turned Saruman from his purpose." Boromir, son of Denethor, stood tall and proud in his mail and cloak. His voice carried the authority of Gondor and the desperation of a realm under siege. "Yet here we sit in council while my city burns. Orc armies mass at our gates. Fell beasts darken our skies. And we speak of destroying the one weapon that could save us." He gestured toward Frodo. "Give Gondor the means to defend itself. This ring of power—" "You speak of what you do not understand," Elrond interrupted, his ageless face grave. "The ring's power would consume you, as it consumed Isildur before you. We have seen what corruption it brings. Saruman the Wise became Saruman of many colors. What hope has mortal man against such temptation?" Legolas shifted forward, his keen elven eyes reflecting the morning light that streamed through the high windows. "Lord Elrond speaks truth. Yet if we cannot use the ring, and we cannot allow it to remain, then we must destroy it. But the path to Mount Doom—" He shook his fair head. "Sauron's gaze turns ever eastward, seeking what was stolen from him. His armies watch every pass, every road." "Aye," rumbled Gimli, his beard bristling with skepticism. "And what army do we send to breach the Black Gate? What force can stand against the Nine and their fell beasts?" A long silence settled over the council like a shroud. The weight of impossible choice pressed down upon them all. How could a company of mortals hope to cross the wasteland of Mordor and reach the fires where the ring was forged? Then Gandalf spoke again, but his voice was different now. Thoughtful, almost wondering. "There is another way. A path we have not considered." All eyes turned to the grey wizard. Even Elrond leaned forward with curiosity. "The enemy watches the roads," Gandalf continued slowly, as if the idea was taking shape even as he spoke. "His spies are in every shadow. His servants patrol every pass. But there are those in Middle-earth who travel roads that no earthbound creature may follow, paths of air and wind above the reach of Orc and Nazgul." Understanding dawned first in Legolas's bright eyes. "You speak of the great eagles." "I do." Gandalf rose, his staff clicking against the stone floor. "Gwaihir the Wind Lord has aided me before. The great eagles bear no love for the shadow. They are swift beyond any fell beast, keen of sight beyond any servant of Sauron." Boromir's face darkened. "You would trust the fate of Middle-earth to birds? What surety is there that they would aid us? What certainty that they could reach Mount Doom?" "Greater certainty than sending a company afoot through Mordor itself," Aragorn said quietly. The ranger had remained silent through much of the debate, but now his grey eyes were bright with possibility. "I have travelled the wild lands. I know the defences Sauron has built along his borders. No company of the wise could pierce them undetected." Legolas nodded eagerly. "My people have watched the eagles for long ages. They fly high above the reach of arrows, swift as the north wind. The Nazgul would be hard-pressed to match their speed, and the fell beasts—" He paused, considering. "The fell beasts are creatures of shadow and corruption. In open sky, against the eagles of Manwë. They would be outmatched. But Gimli stroked his beard, unconvinced. Pretty words, elf friend. But what of the practical matters? How does an eagle reach the fires within Mount Doom? The ring must be cast into the Samath Naur, the chambers of fire themselves. Will these great birds crawl through tunnels of flame? A troubling silence followed this question. It was Sam Gamgee who broke it, speaking for the first time in the Great Council, his voice small but determined. "Begging your pardon, sirs, but someone would still need to carry it. The ring, I mean. Someone to ride with the eagles and finish the task." His round face was pale but resolute. If Mr. Frodo's willing to go by eagle rather than on foot, well, that might be safer for all concerned. Frodo looked up at his loyal gardener with gratitude and fear intermingled. Sam is right. The burden remains mine. But he paused, his hand moving unconsciously to his pocket. If there is a swifter path, a way that does not require crossing all of Mordor in secret. Elrond's expression was deeply troubled. The eagles are proud, and they are free. They are not servants to be commanded, not even by the wise. Gwaihir has aided Gandalf in the past, true, but this is no simple rescue we ask of them. This is war itself. Then we must ask properly, Gandalf said firmly. I will send word to Gwaihir. I will tell him what stake he and his people have in this war. For if Sauron triumphs, do the eagles believe they will long remain free? Do they think their eyries will stay safe from the shadow's reach? And if he refuses, Boromir demanded. Then we return to the ground plan, Aragorn answered. But this attempt should be made. The speed alone. He looked around the circle of faces. How long would it take to walk to Mount Doom? Months at the least. Months during which Sauron's power grows, during which more of your people die, Boromir. But eagles could fly that distance in days. Days in which we would be exposed to every eye in Mordor, Gimli pointed out. There is no stealth in an aerial approach. Perhaps stealth is not what we need, Legolas said thoughtfully. Perhaps what we need is speed. Strike before Sauron can fully muster his defenses. The Nazgul are not countless. There are but 9. If we could engage them in the air while pressing toward Mount Doom. Elrond raised a hand, and the debate stilled. The Lord of Rivendell sat in long contemplation, his ancient eyes distant. When he spoke at last, his voice carried the weight of ages. In the darkest hour of the Second Age, Gil-galad and Elendil took counsel against seeming impossibility. They chose the bold path, the desperate gamble that might save or damn us all. They marched to the Black Gate itself and challenged the Dark Lord upon his own threshold. He looked directly at Frodo. This choice is no less momentous. Ringbearer, what says your heart? Frodo's hand closed around the ring through the fabric of his pocket. He could feel it there, warm and patient, and terribly alive. The thought of carrying it aloft, of being borne by wings toward the fires where it must end, it filled him with terror and strange hope both. I would try this path, he said quietly, if the eagles will have me, if Sam can find the courage to fly. Sam swallowed hard, his face gone quite green at the thought, but he nodded firmly. Where Mr. Frodo goes, I go, even if it's through the clouds themselves. Boromir looked from one face to another, reading the shift in the council's mood. And if this fails? If the eagles are shot down or turned back? Then we will know we tried the swifter path first, Aragorn said. And those who survive can still attempt the journey on foot. The risk is enormous, Elrond warned, to place all hope in this one venture. All hope was already placed in one venture, Gandalf pointed out. Whether by foot or by wing, everything depends upon the ring reaching Mount Doom. This merely changes the method, not the magnitude of what we attempt." The debate continued for another hour, but the tide had turned. One by one, the members of the council came to accept the audacious plan. Even Gimli grudgingly admitted that speed might serve them better than stealth in the dark days ahead. As the sun reached its zenith above Rivendell, Elrond called for the final vote. "All who favor attempting this aerial path, let them speak now." "Aye," said Gandalf without hesitation. "Aye," followed Aragorn, then Legolas. Gimli grumbled under his breath but nodded. "Aye, though I still say it's madness." Boromir was the last to speak, his jaw tight with reluctance. "If it brings swift aid to Gondor, aye." "Then it is decided." Elrond's voice carried finality and foreboding both. "Gandalf, send word to Gwaihir the Wind Lord. Tell him that the hour has come when all free peoples must stand together or fall separately. Tell him that the fate of sky and earth alike hangs in the balance." As the council dispersed, Frodo remained in his seat, staring out at the fair valley of Rivendell. Soon he might see it from heights no hobbit had ever imagined, borne aloft by wings older than the kingdoms of men. The thought should have comforted him. Instead, as he watched a hawk circle high above the river, he wondered if they were choosing salvation or simply a swifter path to doom. But the choice was made. For better or worse, the fate of the ring would be decided in the realm of the Eagles. The hunt for Mount Doom would begin not on the roads of Middle-earth, but in the boundless sky above. Chapter 2. The Windlord's Doubt. The great shadow passed over Rivendell as the sun reached its western descent, darkening the courtyard where the council members had gathered to await their answer. Sam Gamgee stood pressed close to the wall, his round face tilted skyward, eyes wide with wonder and terror both. Above them, wings broader than the sails of the greatest ships carved through the autumn air, with graceful, terrible power. Gwaihir the Windlord descended first, his golden eyes gleaming like captured sunlight as he alighted upon the stone platform before Elrond's hall. Behind him came two others of his kind, Landroval, whose brown and gold feathers caught the light like burnished bronze, and Meneldor, young by eagle standards but keen of eye and swift of wing. "Gandalf Greyhaim," Gwaihir spoke, his voice like wind through mountain peaks, carrying both warmth and warning. "Your message spoke of urgent need. I have come, as I promised, when I bore you from Saruman's tower. But the words you sent..." He fixed the wizard with a stare that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. "What you ask is no simple rescue from a tower top." Gandalf stepped forward, leaning heavily upon his staff. "Indeed, old friend, what I ask may be the most perilous flight your people have ever undertaken. But hear me out, for the stakes are higher than any tower or tyrant." The Windlord's great head tilted, considering. "Speak then, but know that we are not taxes to ferry passengers at will, nor are we immortal, despite what the small folk may believe." Elrond gestured for all to be seated, though the eagles remained standing, their massive forms dwarfing even the tallest of the council members. "The Ring of Power has been found," the Lord of Rivendell began. "Sauron's ring, forged in the fires of Mount Doom. It must be returned to those fires and destroyed, lest the shadow fall upon all Middle-earth." Gwaihir's golden eyes narrowed. "I know of this ring, the ancient evil that corrupted Númenor, that brought ruin to Gil-galad and Elendil, and you would have us carry it into the very heart of Sauron's realm." "The alternative is worse," Gandalf said gravely. "A slow march across hundreds of miles of hostile territory pursued by every servant of the enemy. Months of travel while Sauron's power grows and his armies mass. But by wing we would fly straight into the maw of the beast, Landroval interjected, his voice deeper than his brother's, tinged with the rumble of distant storms. Have you forgotten the Nine? Have you forgotten what hunts the skies above Mordor? Frodo, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. Though he looked impossibly small beside the great eagles, his voice carried clearly. I would bear that burden, Lord Gwaihir. The ring is mine to carry, wherever that path may lead. The Windlord's gaze fell upon the hobbit, and for a long moment there was silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through feathers. You are small, ring-bearer, small and brave, as your kind often are. But do you understand what you ask? The Nazgul command fell beasts now, creatures of shadow and corruption that have no fear of height or wind. They are slower than we, yes, but they are 9, and they are tireless. And what of the defences at the Black Gate? Meneldur added, his young voice sharp with concern. Lord Legolas, you have keen sight. Have your people observed Sauron's preparations? Legolas nodded grimly. Aye, great war machines line the ramparts. Ballista that can pierce dragon hide, catapults that hurl nets of steel and flame. The enemy has long prepared for assault from both ground and sky. More than that, Gimli grumbled, fingering his axe. What happens when you reach Mount Doom itself? These great birds cannot fit through cavern mouths or tunnel entrances. Someone must still walk into those fires afoot. Gwaihir's head turned sharply toward the dwarf. Explain. It was Gandalf who answered, his voice heavy with knowledge, hard won. The One Ring cannot simply be dropped into Mount Doom from above, friend Gwaihir. It must be cast into the Samath Naur, the chambers of fire deep within the mountain, the exact fissure where Sauron first forged it. This requires entering the mountain itself. A troubled silence fell over the assembly. Sam shifted nervously beside Frodo, wringing his hands. The practical reality of their plan was becoming starkly apparent. So, Landroval said slowly, you ask us to fly into the heart of enemy territory, past fell beasts and war machines, to deliver passengers who must then continue alone into the very depths of the enemy's greatest stronghold. That's about the size of it, Sam admitted weakly. Meneldur flexed his talons against the stone, the scraping sound sharp in the quiet. It would be suicide for all involved. Not necessarily, Aragorn said, stepping forward. The ranger's grey eyes were thoughtful, calculating. I have travelled the borders of Mordor. I know its defences, its watchposts. There are ways to approach that might avoid the heaviest concentrations of force. Gwaihir fixed him with a penetrating stare. You speak like one who would join this flight, son of kings. I would, Aragorn replied without hesitation. If you would bear me. My sword and knowledge might prove useful. Legolas moved to stand beside his friend. As would my bow and the sight of my people. We have watched the enemy's movements for long years. I know the patterns of the fell beasts, the routes they patrol. And I, Gimli declared, though his face had gone rather pale, will not be outdone by elf or man. Where they go, I go, even if it means trusting to wings instead of solid stone beneath my feet. Gwaihir looked from face to face, reading the determinations there. You would make this a larger company, not smaller. More weight, more risk of detection. But also more capability, Landroval mused. Brother, if we are to attempt this madness, we should not do it halfway. A proper strike force, not just a desperate delivery. Meneldur stirred, excitement creeping into his voice despite the danger. There are others who might aid us. Eagles in the grey mountains who have no love for the shadow. The Lord of the Eagles beyond the sea of Rune. If we called upon them. A host of eagles. Elrond looked both hopeful and horrified. Such a gathering has not been seen since the War of Wrath itself. Nor would it be needed, Gwaihir said firmly. A host would be seen from afar, would give Sauron time to prepare his full defences. But a small, swift company. He paused, his golden eyes distant. 3 of us, perhaps 4, with passengers carefully chosen. Strike swiftly before the enemy can fully respond. What of timing? Gandalf asked. When would such an attempt be possible? Soon, Landroval replied. The winds are still strong with autumn's breath. Once winter comes, the air grows treacherous above the mountains, and every day we delay gives the enemy more time to strengthen his watch. Sam, who had been growing increasingly pale during this discussion, finally found his voice. Begging your pardon, my lords, but how high do eagles fly? Meneldur looked down at the hobbit with something approaching sympathy. Higher than the tallest mountains, little one. Above the clouds themselves when need demands. Sam swayed slightly and gripped the stone balustrade for support. Above the clouds, he repeated faintly. Frodo placed a steadying hand on his friend's shoulder. Sam, if this is too much. No, sir, Sam said quickly, though his voice shook. Where you go, I go, even if it's up among the stars themselves. Just, maybe don't expect me to look down much. Gwaihir's fierce expression softened slightly. Fear of heights is wisdom, little gardener. Those who do not respect the sky often find themselves embracing the earth more swiftly than they intended. There is another matter, Gandalf said gravely. The ring itself, its power, its corruption. Gwaihir, you would be bearing it for days, feeling its influence. Are you prepared for what that might bring? The Windlord was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes reflecting the dying light. I have felt the touch of dark powers before, Gandalf. When Sauron's shadow first crept forth from Dol Guldur, when the Nazgul first took wing. But this... He looked at Frodo with something approaching pity. This is the source of that darkness. To carry it willingly. I could bear it, Landroval offered. I am younger, perhaps more resistant to such corruption. No, Gwaihir said firmly. If this burden is to be borne by wing, I will bear it. I am the Wind Lord. The responsibility is mine. Elrond leaned forward in his chair, his ageless face creased with concern. And if the ring's power proves too strong, if it turns you from your purpose, then you will have lost 3 eagles instead of a fellowship, Gwaihir replied bluntly. But Gandalf speaks truth. The alternative may be worse. How many will die while a company crawls across Mordor on foot? How many free peoples will fall while Sauron's power grows unchecked? The weight of that argument settled over them all. In the growing twilight, the stakes seemed clearer and more terrible. We would need to plan carefully, Meneldur said at length. Routes, timing, contingencies if we are discovered or turned back. Weather patterns, Legolas added. Cloud cover for concealment, wind currents for speed. Diversions, Aragorn suggested. Perhaps a feint toward the Black Gate to draw attention from our true path. Gwaihir nodded slowly. These are wise considerations. This would not be a simple flight, but a military operation. Dangerous beyond measure, but... He looked around the circle of faces, reading the determination there. But perhaps our only hope of swift victory. Then you will attempt it? Gandalf asked, hope and fear warring in his voice. The 3 eagles exchanged glances, some wordless communication passing between them. Finally, Gwaihir spoke. We will attempt it. Not because the path is safe, but because no path is safe in these dark times. And perhaps, in the realm of the sky, we have some advantage that the enemy has not yet fully calculated. As if summoned by his words, a cold wind swept through the courtyard, setting every banner and hanging to dancing wildly. Above them, the first stars were appearing in a sky that would soon carry them toward either triumph or doom. The eagles of Manwë had chosen to fly once more into the heart of shadow. Now there remained only the preparation for war. Chapter 3. Wings over misty mountains. Dawn broke grey and cold over Rivendell, painting the eastern peaks in shades of silver and rose. Mist clung to the valley floor like a shroud, but above, the sky was clear, a vast highway of wind and cloud that would carry them toward their destiny. Frodo stood upon the great platform, his small pack secured tightly across his shoulders. The ring rested heavy in his breast pocket, closer to his heart than ever before. Beside him, Sam clutched a coil of rope with white knuckles, his round face pale as parchment. "Second thoughts, Master Gamgee?" Aragorn asked gently, adjusting the straps of his own gear. The ranger had shed his travel-worn clothing for lighter garments, better suited to aerial travel, though his sword remained at his side. "Third and fourth thoughts, more like," Sam replied with a shaky laugh. "But I gave my word, and a Gamgee's word is his bond, even if it means flying higher than the moon." Gwaihir approached, his golden eyes grave in the morning light. "Ring-bearer," he addressed Frodo formally, "are you prepared for this journey? Once we take wing, there will be no turning back until we reach our destination, or fall in the attempt." Frodo nodded, though his throat felt tight. "I am ready, Lord Gwaihir." "Then climb upon my back, between my shoulders where the flight feathers are strongest. Hold tight to the harness Elrond's folk have prepared, and trust in the wind." The harness was a thing of elvish craft, woven from mithril wire and silk so fine it seemed to capture starlight. Frodo settled himself carefully into position, feeling the immense power contained in the muscles beneath him. The ground seemed very far away already, and they had not yet left it. Sam, meanwhile, was being helped onto Landrovol's broad back by Legolas, who would fly with the younger eagle. The hobbit's terror was palpable, but his jaw was set with determination that would have made his old gaffer proud. Aragorn took his place with Meneldur, the youngest of the three great eagles, who seemed eager for the adventure despite the dangers ahead. "Swift and sure, young lord," the ranger murmured. Patting the eagle's neck, "We ride for more than ourselves today." "All are secured?" Gwaihir called, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "Then let us fly, and may the Valar guide our wings." The takeoff was unlike anything Frodo had ever imagined. One moment the stone platform was solid beneath them, and the next they were rising into the sky with smooth, powerful strokes that sent them spiraling upward like a leaf caught in a whirlwind. The valley of Rivendell fell away below them, growing smaller and smaller until it was just a green jewel set among the mountains. Sam's yelp of terror echoed across the peaks as Landroval banked sharply to take position on Gwaihir's left wing. But gradually, as they settled into formation, even the frightened gardener seemed to find some measure of wonder in their flight. The world spread out below them like a great map, with rivers running silver in the morning light and forests painted in autumn gold. "Formation flying!" Gwaihir called over the wind. "Meneldur scouts ahead. Landroval guards our flank. We follow the line of the misty mountains south, then turn east toward the gap of Rohan." For the first hour all went well. They climbed higher and higher until the peaks below looked like wrinkled cloth spread across the earth. The air grew thin and cold, but the eagle's great wings beat steadily, carrying them forward at a speed no earthbound traveller could match. It was Legolas who first spotted the danger. His keen elven eyes detected the dark specks rising from the western slopes of Caradhras. At first, just a few, then dozens, then what seemed like a black cloud of wings. "Crebain!" he shouted over the wind. "Saruman's spies!" The crows came in a great wheeling mass, their harsh cries echoing off the mountain faces. But these were no ordinary birds. They flew with purpose and intelligence, their black eyes gleaming with malevolent awareness as they circled the eagle formation. "They report to Isengard," Aragorn called out. "Saruman will know of our passage within the hour." "Then we must fly faster than his warnings can travel," Gwaihir replied grimly. He banked sharply southward, his great wings catching an updraft that sent them soaring higher still. But even as they climbed, new shapes appeared among the peaks, larger than crows, more sinister than any natural bird. "Fell creatures!" Menildor cried in alarm. "Wyverns from the northern passes!" The attack came without warning. 3 winged beasts, smaller than the eagles but savage and quick, dove from the concealment of a cloud bank. Their riders were orcs from the Dunland Hills, clad in crude mail and bearing jagged spears designed for aerial combat. The first wyvern struck at Landroval, its rider thrusting a long lance at Sam's exposed back. Only the eagle's quick barrel roll saved the hobbit's life, though the maneuver sent Sam sliding dangerously in his harness. "Hold fast!" Legolas commanded, drawing his bow with fluid grace despite their precarious position. His first arrow took the orc rider through the throat, sending both mount and rider tumbling toward the peaks below. But 2 more wyverns circled for another attack, and Gwaihir found himself forced to choose between maintaining their course and defending his passengers. The ring-bearers' safety was paramount, but evasive maneuvers would cost them precious time and altitude. "Protect the ring-bearer," Landroval called to his brother, even as he engaged the second wyvern in a vicious aerial duel. Talons and teeth flashed in the morning sun as the 2 creatures grappled, spinning through the air in a deadly dance. Menildor, meanwhile, found himself facing the third attacker, alone. The young eagle was swift and brave, but inexperienced in aerial combat. The wyvern's rider managed to score a deep gash along Menildor's left wing with a barbed spear, sending golden blood spattering across Aragorn's cloak. The ranger responded with cold fury, his sword flashing as he leaned perilously from his saddle to strike at the orc. Steel met claw and fang in a brief, savage encounter that left the wyvern reeling back with a severed wing joint. But the damage was done. Menildor's wing was bleeding freely, and his flight became labored and unsteady. "I cannot maintain this altitude," he gasped, his voice tight with pain. "Emergency landing," Gwaihir commanded. "That valley below. Quickly, before more enemies arrive." They descended rapidly, fighting both gravity and the mountain winds that tried to dash them against the rocky peaks. Sam had gone quite green and was gripping his harness so tightly that his knuckles were white as bone. But he did not cry out again. The valley Gwaihir had chosen was narrow and hidden, little more than a crack between 2 towering peaks. A thin stream ran through its center, and scattered pine trees provided some concealment from above. They landed hard on the rocky ground, the eagle's great feet scrabbling for purchase on the loose stone. "How bad is the wound?" Aragorn asked immediately, dropping from Menildor's back to examine the injured wing. "Bad enough," the young eagle replied through gritted beak. "I can fly, but not at full speed or altitude. I will slow you down." Legolas was already scanning the sky above them, his bow strung and ready. More Crebain circle overhead. They mark our position. And see there, smoke signals from the peaks. Saruman's servants, spread word of our passage. Frodo climbed down from Gwaihir's back on unsteady legs. The brief combat had shaken him more than the height or speed, bringing home the reality of what they faced. How long before Sauron learns of our approach? Not long, Gwaihir admitted grimly. The White Wizard has many servants, and they are swift to report. By nightfall, the enemy will know that eagles fly toward his realm. Sam sat heavily on a boulder, his head in his hands. So much for the element of surprise, he said miserably. Perhaps not, Aragorn said slowly, his grey eyes thoughtful. Saruman knows we fly toward Mordor, but not our exact route or timing. If we change our course, fly by night when the enemy's watchers are less keen. Night flying over the misty mountains? Landrevil's voice carried deep concern. Brother, the risks are enormous. Sudden storms, downdrafts that could dash us against unseen peaks. The risks of continuing by daylight may be greater still, Gwaihir replied. If Sauron has time to prepare his defences, to position his Nazgul along our likely path. They held council there in the hidden valley, while Legolas kept watch, and Meneldur tended his wounds with water from the stream. The debate was swift but thorough, speed versus safety, the known dangers of night flight against the growing certainty of organized opposition. In the end, it was Frodo who settled the matter. We came this way because speed was our advantage, he said quietly. If we lose that, we lose everything. Better to risk the storms and darkness than face the full wrath of the enemy in broad daylight. Gwaihir looked down at the small hobbit with something like respect. Spoken like a true ring-bearer. Very well. We rest here until the sun sets, then fly through the darkness. Meneldur, can you manage the night air with that wing? I can manage, the young eagle replied firmly, though his voice was tight with pain. Then we continue, Gwaihir decided, but our route must change. Instead of the gap of Rohan, we will risk the high passes above Hollin. Longer, more dangerous, but perhaps unexpected. Legolas dropped down from his watching post, his fair face troubled. More Crebain gather above, and I see smoke from distant peaks. Word spreads swiftly. Then let it spread, Gwaihir said with fierce determination. Let Saruman tell his dark master that eagles fly toward Mordor. By the time the enemy fully rouses to meet us, we will already be at his very gates. As the day wore toward evening, they made what preparations they could in the hidden valley. Aragorn dressed Meneldor's wound with herbs from his pack, while Sam and Frodo shared a quiet meal of lembas bread. The elven waybread tasted of honey and sunshine, a reminder of peaceful lands that seemed very far away. Are you afraid, Mr. Frodo? Sam asked, as they watched the sun sink behind the western peaks. Terrified, Frodo admitted, but also hopeful. We've come farther in one day than the Fellowship could have managed in a week on foot. If we can maintain this pace, we'll be at Mount Doom before Sauron knows what hit him, Sam finished with forced cheer. And then we can get this nasty business over with and go home. But even as they spoke, both hobbits could feel the weight of watching eyes from the peaks above. Saruman's servants were patient and numerous, and word of their passage would fly swifter than any eagle to the dark tower where the enemy waited. As full darkness settled over the mountains and the first stars appeared in the clear sky, the three eagles spread their great wings once more. The night air was cold and treacherous, full of sudden gusts and hidden dangers, but it also offered concealment from the many eyes that now sought them. Rising into the star-filled darkness, they flew toward an uncertain dawn, racing the very winds to reach Mount Doom before the trap that was surely closing around them could snap shut. Behind them, the peaks of the misty mountains faded into shadow, but ahead lay dangers greater still, and the hope, however faint, that speed and courage might yet triumph where stealth had failed. Chapter 4. The Shadow of the Nazgul. The pre-dawn darkness was giving way to grey twilight when they first saw the smoke. Long columns of black and grey rose from the plains of Rohan far below, marking where villages burned in the growing light. Even at their great height, the eagles could smell the acrid stench of destruction carried on the morning winds. "Saruman's work," Aragorn called grimly from Meneldor's back. He moved swiftly to answer our passage. Frodo gripped his harness tighter as Gwaihir banked to avoid a towering column of smoke that rose from what had once been a prosperous settlement. The sight of such wanton destruction filled him with anger and sorrow both. But beneath those familiar emotions stirred something else, something darker and more seductive. "They burn because of you," whispered a voice that seemed to come from within his own thoughts, though he knew it was not his own. "Because you carry what should be mine. Give it back, and the burning stops." Gwaihir's flight pattern suddenly became erratic, his great wings beating irregularly as he fought against some unseen influence. "Ring-bearer," the eagle's voice was strained, almost breathless. "Or something. Something whispers in my mind. Promises of power, of dominion over the very winds themselves." "The ring," Frodo replied through gritted teeth, his hand moving instinctively to his breast pocket. "It grows stronger as we near Mordor. Can you resist it?" I will try." But even as Gwaihir spoke, his golden eyes flickered with a strange inner light, and his flight path wavered dangerously close to a mountain peak. It was then that the shadows rose from the south. 9 black shapes lifting from the direction of Dol Guldur, their wings like torn shrouds against the lightning sky. The fell beasts that bore the Nazgul were creatures of nightmare made manifest, part bat, part carrion bird, part dragon, with hides like diseased leather and eyes that burned with malevolent fire. "Nazgul!" Legolas cried out in warning, his keen eyes picking out details that the others could barely discern. 9 riders on fell beasts, rising fast from the south. The Witch King led the formation, his crowned helm glinting dully in the dawn light. Behind him came his 8 companions, lords of shadow and despair, who had once been mighty kings among men. Now they served only the will of their dark master, and that will was fixed utterly upon the small figure clinging to Gwaihir's back. "They come for the ring," Frodo said unnecessarily. He could feel their approach like ice in his veins, could hear their wordless cries of hunger and rage carried on winds that suddenly seemed charged with malice. The aerial battle began without warning or ceremony. The Witch King dove straight at Gwaihir, his fell beast's talons extended and its beak gaping to reveal rows of razor teeth. The Windlord barely managed to roll aside, his evasive maneuver sending Frodo sliding dangerously in his harness. "Hold fast," Gwaihir commanded, but his voice carried a strange undertone now, as if he struggled against more than just physical opponents. The ring's influence was growing stronger with each passing moment, its whispers more insistent and seductive. Landroval engaged 3 of the Nazgul single-handedly, his powerful wings beating furiously as he sought to draw them away from his brother. Legolas's bow sang repeatedly, his arrows finding their mark again and again. But the fell beasts seemed to shrug off wounds that would have felled any natural creature. "Their hide is thick," the elf called out in frustration. "Only the strongest shots pierce their armor." Meneldor, still laboring with his wounded wing, found himself facing 2 Nazgul who sought to exploit his weakness. Aragorn drew his sword with fluid grace, the blade ringing clear and true in the mountain air. When one of the fell beasts swooped close, The ranger's steel met the creature's grasping talons with a shower of sparks. But it was the Witch King who posed the greatest threat. His fell beast was larger and more cunning than the others, and he directed his assault with the tactical brilliance of one who had commanded armies in life. Again and again he struck at Gwaihir, forcing the great eagle into increasingly desperate evasive maneuvers. "The ring!" the Nazgul lord shrieked, his voice like the grinding of tombstones. "Give us the ring, and your death will be swift." To Frodo's horror, he felt Gwaihir waver in his flight, as if the eagle was actually considering the demand. The ring's corruption was working swiftly now, amplified by the stress of combat and the proximity of the Nine. "Gwaihir!" Frodo called out desperately. "Remember who you are. Remember what we fight for." The eagle's head snapped around, his golden eyes clearing momentarily. Forgive me, Ring-bearer. The whispers are so strong." But even as he spoke, his gaze drifted back toward the Witch King with something approaching longing. The battle raged across the morning sky, a deadly dance of wing and claw high above the burning plains. Sam, clinging white-knuckled to Landroval's harness, suddenly found himself face to face with one of the Nine as the creatures grappled in mid-air. Without thinking, he drew Sting from its sheath, and the blade blazed with blue fire. "Get back!" Sam cried, slashing wildly at the Nazgul. The elven blade bit deep into the wraith's arm, and for the first time, one of the Nine recoiled in genuine pain. Black ichor sprayed across Sam's face, burning like acid, but the Nazgul's fell beast pulled away with a shriek of rage. "The elf blade!" Aragorn shouted. "It has power against them!" But their small victories were overshadowed by a larger problem. Gwaihir's resistance to the ring's influence was weakening rapidly. His flight became more erratic with each passing moment, and twice he actually turned toward the Witch King as if to surrender his burden. "We cannot continue like this," Landroval called to his brother as he fought off another diving attack. "The ring's power grows too strong. We must land, must rest before it claims you completely." "No." Gwaihir's voice was tortured, torn between his own will and the insidious whispers of the ring. We must continue. The mission fails if you deliver the ring to the enemy yourself," Meneldor gasped, blood streaming from fresh wounds along his neck. "Brother, see sense." Below them, the great hall of Edoras rose from the plains like a golden crown set among the green hills. It was a haven, a place where they might rest and recover, if they could reach it before the Nazgul overwhelmed them completely. "Edoras," Aragorn called out. "King Theoden might grant us sanctuary." The descent was harrowing. The Nazgul pressed their attack relentlessly, seeking to prevent the eagles from reaching the safety of Rohan's capital. Fell beasts dove and wheeled around them in a black storm of wings and talons, their riders' weapons gleaming with malevolent light. But somehow, through skill and desperation and sheer stubborn courage, the eagles fought their way down. They landed hard in the great courtyard before Meduseld, their wings spread wide in defiance as the Nazgul circled overhead like vultures waiting for carrion. The gates of the hall burst open, and warriors of Rohan poured forth, their spears gleaming in the morning sun. At their head rode Theoden King, but it was a shadow of the great ruler he had once been. His face was pale and haggard, his eyes clouded with an unnatural weariness that spoke of more than age. Behind the king came another figure that made Aragorn's blood run cold, Grima Wormtongue, counselor to Theoden and secret servant of Saruman. The man's pale eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction as he took in the scene before him. "What is this?" Theoden demanded, his voice trembling with weakness and suspicion. "Great birds of prey in my courtyard? What business do you have in Rohan?" Aragorn dismounted from Meneldor's back, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "My lord king, we seek sanctuary. We are pursued by the Nine, the Nazgul, and we bear a burden of great importance to all free peoples." "Lies!" Wormtongue hissed before the king could respond. "See how the dark riders circle above? They would not dare approach Edoras unless they had just cause. These strangers bring evil with them. Better to cast them out before they corrupt the Golden Hall itself." But even as the counsellor spoke, another voice cut through the morning air. Eomer, nephew to the king and marshal of the Mark, pushed forward through the ranks of warriors. "Uncle," he said urgently, "whatever business these travelers have, the Nazgul are our enemies. We cannot treat with the Shadow's servants. Give these strangers sanctuary, and I will lead our riders against the Nine." Theoden wavered, caught between his counselor's poison and his nephew's wisdom. But before he could speak, Gwaihir suddenly lurched forward, his golden eyes now completely clouded with an alien intelligence. "The ring," the eagle said, his voice no longer his own. "Give me the ring, and I will end this. I will bring order to chaos, peace to war." Frodo scrambled back from his mount in horror, his hand closing protectively around the ring in his pocket. The corruption had finally taken hold completely, turning their greatest ally into their most dangerous enemy. Above them, the Nazgul sensed their opportunity. The Witch King's laugh rang out like the sound of breaking glass as he began to descend. His fell beast's wings spread wide for the killing strike. "Now!" Wormtongue cried triumphantly. "See how they are revealed for what they are. Cast them out, my lord. Cast them out before they bring doom upon us all." The warriors of Rohan lowered their spears, uncertain whether to defend the strangers or drive them forth. In the sky above, the Nine prepared for their final assault. And in the courtyard of Edoras, the fate of Middle-earth balanced on a knife's edge, with the ring itself crying out to be claimed by any hand strong enough to seize it. The morning sun climbed higher, but its light seemed wan and pale, as if the very presence of the Nazgul drained warmth from the world. And in the growing shadows, dark choices beckoned with whispered promises of power and peace, lies that sounded sweeter with each passing moment of desperation and fear. The eagles had reached Rohan, but safety remained as distant as ever, while the ring's corruption spread like poison through the very heart of their mission. Chapter 5. The eagle's trial night had fallen over Edoras like a shroud, but sleep brought no peace to the courtyard where the great eagles rested. Above them, the Nazgul still circled in the darkness, their fell beasts' wings creating shifting shadows against the stars. The warriors of Rohan maintained their watch from the walls. But it was an uneasy truce. Wormtongue's poison had done its work, and many looked upon the strange visitors with suspicion and fear. Gwaihir lay apart from his companions, his great head tucked beneath one wing, but his golden eyes remained open and troubled. In the darkness of his thoughts, visions danced, visions sent by the ring that rested so close to his heart. He saw himself crowned in gold and shadow, ruling the skies of Middle-earth with absolute dominion. Every bird, every flying creature would bow to his will. The very winds themselves would serve at his pleasure. "Why resist?" the voice whispered seductively. "You are the Wind Lord, greatest of your kind. Why should you serve when you could rule? Take the ring. Claim what should be yours." The eagle's talons scraped against the stone courtyard as he struggled against the seductive dreams. But with each passing hour, the ring's influence grew stronger, its promises more alluring. What harm would there be in simply looking at it? In feeling its weight in his claws? The attack came without warning, as Gwaihir's internal struggle reached its peak. Orc raiders, sent by Saruman to exploit the chaos and confusion, scaled the walls of Edoras under cover of darkness. Their war cries shattered the night as they poured into the courtyard, crude weapons gleaming in the torchlight. "To arms!" Eomer's voice rang out as he led the countercharge, his sword flashing as he cut down the first orc to reach the ground. "Defend the hall!" But it was Gwaihir's response that chilled the blood of friend and foe alike. The great eagle rose with a shriek of rage that seemed to contain all the fury of winter storms, his eyes blazing not with their normal golden light, but with something darker and more terrible. "Mine," he screamed, the word echoing off the walls of Edoras. "The ring is mine! None shall have it!" Frodo scrambled back in horror as Gwaihir's great head turned toward him, the eagle's beak gaping wide. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the Windlord would strike down the ring-bearer himself, to claim his precious burden. "Brother!" Landroval's voice cut through the madness like a blade. The brown eagle threw himself between Gwaihir and Frodo, his own eyes bright with anguish. "Remember who you are. Remember our oath to Gandalf." The two great birds grappled in the courtyard, their wings beating furiously as they rolled across the stone. Around them, the battle with the orcs raged on, but all eyes were drawn to the terrible sight of eagle fighting eagle, while the Nazgul shrieked with delight overhead. "The corruption spreads too quickly," Meneldor gasped, his wounded wing preventing him from joining the struggle. "The ring's power is too strong for any of us to bear for long." Sam Gamgee, forgotten in the chaos, crept closer to where the two eagles fought. In his hand, Sting blazed with blue fire. But he knew the elven blade would be useless against Gwaihir's massive form. Instead, he did the only thing he could think of. He began to sing. It was an old song from the Shire, a simple tune about gardens and growing things, about the peace of home and the joy of honest work. His voice was small and trembling, nearly lost in the sounds of battle, but somehow it reached Gwaihir's tortured consciousness. The Windlord's struggles gradually subsided as the familiar melody worked its way through the darkness in his mind. When Landroval finally released him, Gwaihir lay panting on the cold stone, his golden eyes clear once more, but filled with shame. I nearly—" The eagle's voice was barely a whisper. "Forgive me, ring-bearer. The darkness in that cursed thing. It shows you everything you've ever wanted, everything you've ever dreamed of having." By the time the last orc had been driven from the walls, the full extent of their crisis had become clear. Gwaihir could no longer be trusted to carry the ring. The corruption was too strong, too seductive. But without the Windlord's strength and leadership, how could they hope to complete their mission? As dawn broke grey and cold over the Riddermark, the companions held council in a corner of the courtyard, while Eomer's men cleaned up the aftermath of the night's battle. The marshal himself sat with them, having defied his uncle's wavering commands to provide what aid he could. "The ring cannot remain with Gwaihir," Aragorn stated bluntly. "The corruption will only grow stronger as we near Mordor. Soon, even his love for his brother will not be enough to restrain him." "Then who?" Landroval asked desperately. "Who among us has the strength to resist such temptation? I am younger than Gwaihir, less experienced in resisting dark influences." "And I am wounded," Meneldor added grimly. "My mind is clouded with pain. I would be even more vulnerable than either of you." Frodo, who had been listening in heavy silence, finally spoke. "Then I must carry it myself, as was always intended. The eagles need not bear that burden. You need only carry me." "But the strain of flight, the cold and wind at such heights," Gwaihir protested. "You are small, ring-bearer. The journey would be torture for one of your kind. Better torture than corruption, Frodo replied firmly. I have carried this burden before. I can carry it again. Sam nodded vigorously in support. Mr. Frodo's got the right of it. The ring was meant for him to bear, not for anyone else. We hobbits have some resistance to its tricks, more than most, anyway. Éomer, who had been listening to this strange conversation with growing amazement, finally spoke. You speak of the One Ring of Sauron, as if it were real, not legend, and you fly toward Mordor to destroy it? We do, Aragorn confirmed, though our mission grows more perilous with each passing hour. The Marshal's weathered face grew thoughtful. Then know this. My riders have brought word from the eastern borders. Sauron's armies mass in greater numbers than any have seen since the last alliance. Orc companies march from Dol Guldur, and fell beasts patrol the skies above the Anduin. Your aerial approach has not gone unnoticed. Then we need a new strategy, Meneldur said urgently. Multiple routes. Perhaps divide our enemy's attention. Or abandon this attempt entirely, Gwaihir said heavily, his shame evident in every word. I have proven that the eagles are not strong enough for this burden. Perhaps we should return the ring to those who can guard it properly. No. The unexpected vehemence in Sam's voice surprised them all. We've come too far to turn back now, Mr. Gwaihir, and begging your pardon, but you're not the first to be tempted by that nasty thing. Even Master Gandalf wouldn't touch it, and he's the wisest of all the wise. The Hobbit speaks truth, Éomer agreed. My uncle may be unwell, but I remember the teachings of my father. Sometimes the smallest folk prove the strongest when it matters most. Aragorn stood and began pacing the length of their small sanctuary. What if we change our approach entirely? Instead of flying directly toward Mordor, we follow the river route. The Anduin would provide concealment from above, and perhaps the Nazgul would not expect us to take such a long path. The river route? Landroval considered this. It would add days to our journey, and bring us perilously close to Dol Guldur. But he paused, his keen eyes brightening. But it would also take us past Lorien, where the Lady's power might offer some protection. And the Nazgul would expect a direct assault, Meneldur added, with growing excitement. They would position their defences along the traditional routes to the Black Gate, not along the river. Gwaihir remained silent for a long moment, wrestling with his shame and the terrible knowledge of how close he had come to betraying everything he held dear. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with resolve. I will not carry the ring again. That much is certain. But if the ring-bearer is willing to trust in my strength, despite my weakness, if he can bear the cold and wind while I bear him, then I will see this through to the end. I owe that much to Gandalf, and to Middle-earth itself. Frodo looked up at the great eagle, reading the genuine remorse and determination in those golden eyes. I trust you, Lord Gwaihir. The ring's corruption is not your failing. It is the very reason we must destroy it. Will you help me carry this burden to its end? The Wind-Lord bowed his great head. I will, ring-bearer. And if the darkness takes me again, I trust my brother to stop me by any means necessary. Landroval's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his voice was steady. I will, brother, though it break my heart to do so. As they prepared for departure, Éomer provided them with additional intelligence about the enemy's movements and disposition. The orcs were indeed massing in great numbers, but their attention seemed focused on the traditional approaches to Mordor. The river route might indeed offer them an unexpected advantage. Go swiftly, the Marshal urged, as they made ready to take wing once more. Every hour you delay gives Sauron more time to prepare his defenses, and know that whatever happens, Rohan remembers its friends." The departure from Edoras was more subdued than their arrival. The eagles rose into the grey morning sky with heavy hearts and renewed purpose, but the joy of flight had been tainted by the knowledge of how easily they could be corrupted, how thin the line was between salvation and damnation. Frodo now rode with the ring secured in a special harness around his own chest, its weight familiar and terrible against his heart. The cold wind bit through his clothing as they climbed toward the clouds, but he endured it without complaint. This was his burden to bear, and he would see it through to the end. Behind them, Edoras dwindled to a golden speck on the vast plains of Rohan. Ahead lay the long curve of the Anduin, and beyond that the shadow-haunted peaks of the Efelduath. Somewhere in that darkness waited Mount Doom and the fires where the ring must be unmade. The eagles flew on through the morning, their formation tighter now, more protective. They had faced the first test of their resolve and emerged wounded, but whole. The real test, however, still lay ahead, in the very heart of the enemy's realm where no eagle had ever flown. But they would try, for friendship, for duty, for the hope that even the smallest light might pierce the greatest darkness. They would try. Chapter 6. The River Road. The great curve of the Anduin stretched below them like a silver ribbon, winding through the brown landscape of late autumn. For 3 days they had followed the river's course, flying low to avoid detection, using the morning mists and evening shadows as concealment from the many eyes that sought them. The change in their flight pattern had brought unexpected benefits. The river provided natural landmarks that prevented them from losing their way, and the constant sound of flowing water helped mask the thunder of their great wings. More importantly, the Nazgul seemed to have lost their trail. The fell beasts had been seen circling far to the east, searching the more direct routes to Mordor. But the respite came at a cost. Flying so low and so carefully was exhausting work for the eagles, and the constant vigilance required to avoid detection wore on all their nerves. Worse still, Frodo could feel the ring's influence growing stronger with each mile that brought them closer to its birthplace. "There!" Legolas called from his perch on Landroval, pointing toward a distinctive hill that rose from the eastern shore. "Amon Hen, the Hill of Sight. We have come far indeed, in 3 days of flight." Aragorn's face darkened as he recognized the landmark. The Seat of Seeing. In the old days, the kings of Gondor set watchers there to guard against enemies from the east. Now, he trailed off, his keen eyes catching movement among the trees at the hill's base. "Something moves below," Gwaihir reported, his golden eyes fixed on the wooded slopes. But his voice carried a strange undertone, as if he struggled against some inner turmoil. The ring's proximity was affecting him again, despite his best efforts to resist. As they circled lower, keeping to the concealment of a cloud bank, the scene below became horrifyingly clear. A group of travelers, men in the livery of Gondor, were engaged in desperate battle with a pack of Uruk-hai. But this was no ordinary skirmish. One figure, tall and proud in his bearing despite his wounds, stood over 2 smaller forms with his great horn raised to his lips. "Boromir!" Aragorn cried out in anguish. "But how?" The horn of Gondor rang out across the waters, its deep note carrying even to their great height. It was a call for aid that would never be answered, a final defiance in the face of certain doom. Below them, the son of Denethor fought with the fury of desperation, his sword flashing as he held the Uruks at bay. "We must help him!" Sam called out, his voice cracking with emotion. "How?" Meneldur replied grimly. "We cannot land among those trees without giving away our position to every enemy for miles around. And if we delay here—" They watched in helpless horror as the inevitable unfolded. Despite his skill and courage, Boromir was overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Arrow after arrow found its mark until he could no longer stand. Even then, he continued to fight from his knees, protecting the two small figures, hobbits by their size, who cowered behind an overturned log. "Merry and Pippin," Frodo whispered, recognizing his young cousins despite the distance. "But why are they here? They should be safe in Rivendell." The answer came in fragments as they circled overhead, piecing together the tragedy below. Somehow, despite the decision to take the aerial route, a smaller group had made the traditional journey south, perhaps as a diversion, perhaps as insurance against the failure of the Eagle mission. The details mattered less than the terrible reality. Good folk were dying while they flew helplessly above. Boromir's horn fell silent at last. The great warrior of Gondor slumped forward, his body pierced by countless arrows, but his last act had bought precious time. The Uruks, thinking their work done, began to argue among themselves about the disposition of their prizes. "They seek to take the halflings alive," Legolas observed, his elven sight picking out details the others missed. "See how they bind them, rather than slay them." "Saruman's orders," Aragorn said grimly. "He wants them for questioning, to learn of our mission." It was then that disaster struck their own company. Gwaihir, who had been growing more agitated with each passing moment, suddenly let out a shriek of rage and dove toward the battle below. "The ring!" the eagle cried, his voice no longer his own. "The precious comes to us. We will take it from the dead knight. Yes, precious." "Gwaihir, no," Frodo called out desperately. But the Windlord was beyond reason. The sight of violence and the scent of blood had triggered something primal in the ring's corruption, transforming the noble eagle into something savage and grasping. Landroval and Menildor dove after their leader, but Gwaihir's madness had given him speed beyond their ability to match. The great eagle struck the clearing like a thunderbolt, his talons ripping through uruks and trees alike as he sought to reach Frodo, or more precisely, to reach the ring that Frodo carried. The surviving uruks scattered in terror, abandoning their captives as the great bird of prey descended among them. But their flight was noted by watchers in distant towers, and signals began to flash across the landscape, mirrors catching the afternoon sun to carry word of the eagle attack far and wide. "The secret is lost!" Menildor gasped as he and Landroval finally brought Gwaihir under control. "Every enemy from here to Barad-dûr will know of our presence now." Below them, Merry and Pippin had used the chaos to slip their bonds and flee into the forest. But Boromir lay still among the scattered orc corpses. His quest ended in honor and tragedy. The horn of Gondor gleamed dully in the fading light. Forever silent, Gwaihir's reason gradually returned as they climbed back to safer altitudes. But the damage was done. His golden eyes were filled with shame and horror at what he had nearly done. But more concerning was the way they lingered on Frodo, with a hunger that had not been there before. I cannot trust myself," the eagle admitted in a voice heavy with despair. "The ring's power grows stronger with each league we fly toward Mordor. Soon, not even my love for you, brother, will be enough to restrain me." Sam, who had been unusually quiet since witnessing Boromir's sacrifice, finally found his voice. "That poor man," he said, tears streaming down his cheeks. "He died protecting Master Merry and Pippin, and we couldn't do nothing to help." "We could have saved him," Aragorn said bitterly. "If we had landed, if we had fought." "And doomed the mission," Frodo replied quietly. "Boromir knew the risks when he chose his path. He would not want us to abandon our duty for his sake." But even as he spoke the words, Frodo felt their hollow ring. The sight of his friend's death had shaken him more than he cared to admit, and the ring seemed to whisper constantly now, promising that such sacrifices were unnecessary. Why struggle? Why watch friends die? Take my power and end this suffering. They flew on through the afternoon, following the river as it curved eastward toward the Brown Lands. Behind them, smoke signals rose from a dozen hills, carrying news of their passage to every enemy outpost. The element of surprise was gone, possibly forever. "Look there," Legolas called out, pointing toward the eastern horizon. "The Black Gate itself comes into view, and see what masses before it." Even at their great distance, the sight was sobering. Black streams of troops poured from the Morannon, like ants from a disturbed hill. Siege engines were being wheeled into position, and the very air above the gate seemed to shimmer with heat from countless forges working at fever pitch. "They prepare for war," Aragorn observed. "Not just for our arrival, but for a greater conflict." "The war would have come regardless," Meneldor said grimly. "Our mission has simply announced its beginning." As evening approached, they were forced to seek shelter in the desolate region known as the Dead Marshes. The foul waters stretched for miles in every direction, dotted with corpses of ancient warriors whose faces glowed with spectral light beneath the dark surface. "We dare not fly further in darkness," Landroval advised, as they settled on a relatively solid mound of earth surrounded by the marsh waters. "The fell beasts hunt by night, and in this accursed place, even our keen sight would be of little use." The night that followed was one of counsel and hard decisions. Gwaihir sat apart from the others, his great head bowed with shame and the effort of resisting the ring's ever-stronger pull. The corruption was accelerating, and they all knew it. "We are perhaps 2 days from Mount Doom, if we maintain our current pace," Aragorn reported, consulting the crude map Éomer had provided. "But every hour brings greater danger. The enemy knows we come, and they are mobilizing to meet us." "Perhaps that is for the best," Frodo said quietly. "Better to face them in open battle than to sneak through shadows while friends die for our cause." Sam looked at his master with concern. "Mr. Frodo, you're talking like you're giving up hope." "Not giving up," Frodo replied, "but accepting reality. We may not survive this mission, Sam. We may not even reach Mount Doom. But if we can draw Sauron's attention, if we can force him to commit his forces against us, others might strike elsewhere while he is distracted," Aragorn finished, understanding dawning in his grey eyes. "Gandalf, perhaps, or the forces of Gondor and Rohan." It was a desperate strategy, but no more desperate than their entire venture had been from the beginning. As they settled in for a few hours of uneasy rest, the weight of their burden seemed heavier than ever. Behind them lay the sacrifice of good men who had trusted in their mission. Ahead lay the culmination of their quest, victory or doom, with no middle ground between them. In the phosphorescent glow of the dead marshes, the faces of ancient warriors seemed to watch them with hollow eyes, as if judging whether these new heroes were worthy of the sacrifices made in ages past. And in the darkness beyond their small circle of warmth and fellowship, the ring continued its relentless whisper of seduction and despair, promising easy answers to impossible questions. The road to Mount Doom stretched ahead, no longer hidden, but blazing like a beacon that would draw every enemy in Middle-earth to their final confrontation. They had chosen speed over stealth, and now they would learn whether courage and friendship could triumph where caution and secrecy had failed. The test of their resolve was far from over. Indeed, it had barely begun. Chapter 7. The Dead Marshes. The Dead Marshes held no peace for the living, even in the darkest hours before dawn. Beneath the black waters, the faces of ancient warriors glowed with spectral light, their eyes following every movement of the small company huddled on their precarious island of solid ground. But these were not merely the remnants of long-dead kings and soldiers. They were something far more sinister. Meneldor was the first to notice that something was wrong. The young eagle had been standing watch while the others rested, his keen eyes scanning the mist-shrouded waters for signs of pursuit. But as the night wore on, his gaze began to linger on the glowing faces below, and his breathing grew shallow and irregular. "Do you see them?" he whispered, his voice carrying a strange, dreamy quality. "The kings of old, calling from beneath the water? They offer such wisdom, such power." Landroval's head snapped up at his companion's words. The brown eagle had been dozing fitfully, but the tone in Meneldor's voice sent alarm racing through his tired mind. "What do you see, young one? Speak plainly." But Meneldor was no longer listening. His eyes had taken on the same phosphorescent glow as the faces in the water, and he began to step toward the marsh's edge with measured, deliberate movements. "They call to me," he said in that same dreamy voice. "The dead kings. They say the eagles were meant to rule Middle-earth, not serve. They offer... No!" Landroval lunged forward, catching Meneldor just as the younger eagle's talons touched the water's surface. The moment of contact sent ripples across the marsh, and the faces below smiled with terrible hunger. "Do not look into the water. Do not listen to their voices." The struggle woke the others. Sam scrambled to his feet, sting blazing blue in his hand as he sensed the supernatural malice that surrounded them. Aragorn's sword sang from its sheath, though steel would be of little use against the phantoms that haunted this accursed place. But it was Gwaihir's reaction that chilled them all to the bone. The Windlord rose with a shriek of rage that echoed across the marshes, his golden eyes now completely black in the spectral light. "Mine!" he screamed, turning toward Frodo with talons extended. "The precious is mine. The dead kings promise it to me if I cast the ring-bearer into the waters." Frodo scrambled backward, his hand clutching the ring through his shirt. The corrupting influence of the marshes had somehow amplified the ring's power over Gwaihir, turning whispers into commands, suggestions into irresistible compulsions. "Brother, please!" Landroval called desperately, still struggling to restrain Meneldor, while his other companion descended into madness. "Remember who you are. Remember your oath." But Gwaihir was beyond reason. He stalked toward Frodo with predatory grace, his great wings spread wide to prevent escape. "Give it to me, ring-bearer. Give me the precious, and I will end your suffering. The dead kings show me such beautiful futures, kingdoms of sky and cloud where eagles rule all." It was Sam who acted first. The brave hobbit threw himself between Gwaihir and his master, sting held high despite the hopeless mismatch in size. "You'll not touch Mr. Frodo while I draw breath," he declared, his voice shaking but his resolve absolute. The blade's blue fire seemed to have some effect on the corrupted eagle. Gwaihir paused, his black eyes flickering between their unnatural darkness and their normal golden hue. "Small guardian," he said, in a voice like grinding stone, "you cannot stop what must be. The ring calls to power, and power answers." "Then I'll answer too," Aragorn said grimly, stepping up beside Sam with his sword ready. "You want the ring? You'll have to go through both of us." But even as they faced off against their former ally, new danger emerged from the marshes themselves. The water began to churn and bubble as shapes moved beneath its surface, not the passive faces of the dead, but something active and predatory. Eyes like pale lamps glowed in the darkness, and a voice like the hiss of steam spoke from the shadows. Yes, my precious. We hears it calling, we does. The ring comes to the marshes where Sméagol was born, where Sméagol fell into the water long ago. From the mist emerged a creature that might once have been a hobbit, but was now something far more wretched. Gollum crawled across the treacherous surface of the marsh with unnatural agility, his large eyes fixed hungrily on Frodo's chest where the ring lay hidden. "Give it to us!" Gollum hissed, his voice rising to a shriek. "We needs it, precious. We've been looking for it, searching for it, following the nasty flying creatures and their burden." The arrival of this new threat seemed to break through some of Gwaihir's corruption. The great eagle's eyes cleared slightly as he recognized a more immediate danger than the ring's whispered promises. "The creature from legend," he said, in a voice that was partly his own again. "Sméagol, who was lost to the ring's power." "Clever bird thing," Gollum crooned, never taking his eyes off Frodo. Yes, Sméagol knows about the ring, knows its tricks and its lies. But Sméagol also knows how to get the precious back where it belongs. Give it to us, and we shows you safe ways to the mountain. We knows the secret paths, the hidden roads." "Don't listen to him," Sam warned, but even as he spoke, Frodo found himself considering the offer. They were lost in hostile territory, pursued by enemies, and betrayed by their own allies' corruption. What if this wretched creature could indeed show them a way to Mount Doom? Yes, the ring whispered in his mind, its voice blending seamlessly with Gollum's entreaties. Trust him. Let him guide you. What could one small creature do against the power you carry? "No," Frodo said aloud, as much to himself as to Gollum. "No, I won't be deceived. The ring has corrupted you completely, Sméagol. I won't let it do the same to me." Gollum's face twisted with rage and despair. "Cruel ring-bearer, nasty tricksy hobbitses. We only wants to help. We does. But they spits on poor Sméagol's kindness." The creature's fury triggered a violent reaction from the marshes themselves. The faces in the water began to glow brighter, and spectral hands reached up from the depths, grasping at anything solid they could find. Even more disturbing, the dead faces began to show different images. Not the ancient dead, but possible futures. Frodo gasped as he recognized his own face among them, along with Sam's, Aragorn's, and the great eagles themselves, all staring up from watery graves. "Visions of what may come," Aragorn said grimly. "The marshes show us our possible fates." In the spectral light, they could see other scenes playing out in the water. Great battles in distant lands, the fall of cities, the triumph of shadow across all Middle-earth. But there were also glimpses of hope. Eagles soaring free in clear skies, the ring destroyed in fires of Mount Doom, peace returning to the world. "All futures remain possible," Landroval said, his voice strained from his ongoing struggle to keep Meneldor from the water's edge. "But we must choose which one we will make real." Gwaihir, still fighting against the ring's corruption, but slowly losing ground, looked at the visions with eyes that flickered between gold and black. "So many choices," he whispered. "So many paths to power, to dominion, or to freedom," Frodo said firmly, meeting the great eagle's troubled gaze. "The choice is still yours, Lord Gwaihir. You can choose to be more than the ring would make you." For a long moment, eagle and hobbit stared at each other, while Gollum circled them like a predator, and the dead in the water whispered their seductive promises. Then, with visible effort, Gwaihir stepped back from Frodo and bowed his great head. I choose to try," the eagle said, in a voice heavy with pain and determination. "Though it grows harder with each moment, I choose to resist." But even as he spoke, they could all see that his resistance was failing. The corruption was too strong, the ring's proximity too overwhelming. Soon, perhaps within hours, the Windlord would be lost completely to the ring's power. We cannot wait for dawn, Aragorn decided grimly. Every moment we delay gives the corruption more time to work. We must leave now, while Gwaihir still has some measure of control. The enemy will see us coming in the darkness, Meneldur protested, though his own voice carried the dreamy quality that spoke of the marsh's influence. Let them, Sam said unexpectedly. Maybe it's time to stop sneaking about like thieves in the night. Maybe it's time to show this Sauron what we're made of. Gollum, sensing that his opportunity was slipping away, made one last desperate attempt. He lunged toward Frodo with surprising speed, his thin fingers reaching for the ring's hiding place, but Sam was ready for him. Sting swept through the air in a blue arc, and Gollum fell back with a shriek of pain and rage. "Cruel, cruel little stabber," Gollum wailed. "We only wanted to help, but they hurts us. They wounds poor Smeagol." "Help yourself to a long walk in the opposite direction," Sam said grimly, keeping his blade between Gollum and Frodo. "We don't need your kind of help." The creature retreated to the edge of their small island, his pale eyes never leaving the ring-bearer. "We follows, precious," he hissed. "We follows and we waits. The ring will call to Smeagol, and Smeagol will answer. Oh yes, we will answer." With that ominous promise hanging in the air, Gollum slipped back into the marsh waters and disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only ripples to mark his passage. "We need to leave immediately," Landroval urged. "The corruption spreads with each moment we remain in this cursed place. Already I can feel the whispers starting in my own mind." Gwaihir nodded with visible effort. "Yes. Whatever strength I have left, I will use to carry the ring-bearer as far as possible toward Mount Doom. But know this, I may not be myself when we arrive. Be ready to act without me, or even against me if necessary." The takeoff from the dead marshes was harrowing. The spectral hands reached up from the water as they launched, seeking to drag them down into the depths where so many heroes had found their end. But the eagle's powerful wings carried them up and away from that place of death and visions, climbing toward the star-filled sky where cleaner air might help clear their minds. As they flew eastward through the darkness, leaving the accursed marshes behind, each of them carried the weight of what they had witnessed. The visions in the water had shown them possible futures, some terrible, some wonderful, all depending on the choices they made in the hours ahead. Behind them, the dead marshes settled back into their eternal brooding, while somewhere in their depths Gollum waited with the patience of the damned. Ahead lay Mount Doom and the culmination of their quest, and with each wingbeat that carried them closer to their destination, the ring's corruption spread further through their company, threatening to turn their greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. The final test was approaching, and none of them were certain they would prove strong enough to meet it. Chapter 8. The Black Gate's Challenge. Dawn broke blood-red over the Ephel-Duoth as the three great eagles approached the Morannon, the Black Gate of Mordor. The massive fortress loomed before them like a cancer upon the earth, its twin towers stretching toward the sky like grasping claws. Even at their great height, the companions could feel the malevolent power that radiated from Sauron's greatest stronghold. "Behold," Aragorn said grimly, his voice barely audible over the rush of wind, "the gate of the land of shadow. Here all roads to Mordor converge, and here Sauron has placed his mightiest defenses." The sight that greeted them would have broken the spirit of any earthbound army. The Black Gate was not merely a fortress, it was a vast military complex stretching for miles in every direction. Siege engines beyond counting lined the ramparts, massive ballistas capable of hurling spears the size of tree trunks, catapults that could launch nets of steel and fire, and archer towers packed with orc bowmen whose arrows could darken the sky. But it was what lay beyond the gate that truly chilled their hearts. The plains of Gorgoroth stretched away into the distance, black with marching armies. Tens of thousands of orcs, Uruk-hai, and worse creatures moved in perfect formation, their weapons and armor glinting in the hellish light of Mount Doom's distant fires. "The eye sees us," Frodo said suddenly, his voice tight with pain. The ring around his neck had grown hot as forge metal, and he could feel a terrible presence pressing against his mind like a weight of iron. "Sauron knows we have come." Even as he spoke, the air around the Black Gate began to shimmer and darken. From hidden roosts and caverns fell beasts emerged by the dozens, then the hundreds. Their riders were not merely the 9, but legions of lesser Nazgul and orc sky warriors, all wheeling into formation with military precision that spoke of long preparation. "They were waiting for us," Landreval said with grim realization. "This is no hasty defense. They have been preparing for our approach since we first took wing." Gwaihir, who had been struggling against the ring's corruption throughout their flight, suddenly straightened as the sight of so many enemies triggered something primal in his warrior's heart. The battle rage of his ancestors flowed through him, temporarily burning away the ring's whispers in the pure fire of combat fury. "Let them come," the Wind Lord growled, his voice more his own than it had been in ours. "We did not fly this far to be turned back by numbers, no matter how great." The first attack came without warning. A massive bolt from a ballista shrieked past Meneldor's wing, missing by mere inches. The young eagle rolled desperately aside as more projectiles filled the air around them. Not random shots, but carefully aimed volleys designed to force them into killing zones where the archers waited. "Climb!" Aragorn shouted over the din of battle. "Get above their range!" But even as the eagles spiraled upward, seeking the safety of higher altitude, the fell beasts rose to meet them. The aerial battle that followed was unlike anything Middle-earth had ever seen. Hundreds of winged creatures clashed in the sky above the Black Gate, their cries echoing off the mountains as claw met claw and fang met steel. Legolas's bow sang continuously, his arrows finding their mark again and again. But for every fell beast that fell, 2 more seemed to take its place. Sam clung desperately to Landreval's harness, sting blazing blue in his hand as he struck at any enemy that came within reach. It was then that a voice rang out across the battlefield, a voice like the grinding of tombstones, filled with malice and mockery. From the highest tower of the Black Gate, a figure in black robes raised a staff crowned with flame. "Behold the fools who would challenge the might of Mordor." The mouth of Sauron's voice carried impossibly far, reaching even their great height. "See how they struggle against forces beyond their comprehension." The servant of the Dark Lord raised something that glinted in the hellish light. Boromir's horn, broken and blood-stained from the battle at Amon Hen. "Your champion is dead, Eagle Riders. His sacrifice was for nothing, as yours will be." The sight of that noble horn in the hands of the enemy's servant sent rage surging through Aragorn's heart. "You lie!" he shouted back, though he knew his words could not carry so far. "Boromir died with honor, defending the innocent." "Honor?" The mouth of Sauron's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. What honor is there in futile gesture? What glory in meaningless death? Surrender now, and your end will be swift. But their defiance only seemed to amuse Sauron's lieutenant. At his signal, the full weight of Mordor's aerial forces descended upon them. The sky became a maelstrom of wings and weapons as hundreds of fell beasts converged on their small formation. Gwaihir fought with the fury of his ancient lineage, his talons and beak carving through enemy after enemy. The temporary clarity brought by combat had restored much of his strength and skill, but even the Wind Lord could not stand against such numbers indefinitely. Meneldor, still weakened by his wounds from the Misty Mountains, found himself overwhelmed by a pack of smaller, fell beasts. Their riders lashed at him with barbed whips, seeking to entangle his wings and send him plummeting to earth. Blood streamed from a dozen wounds as he struggled to maintain formation. "I cannot hold them," the young eagle gasped, his flight becoming erratic as exhaustion and pain took their toll. "Stay with us," Landroval called desperately. But even as he spoke, his brother was fighting for his own life. 3 Nazgul had singled out the brown eagle, their fell beasts coordinating their attacks with deadly precision. It was Sam who turned the tide of that particular engagement. As one of the Nazgul swept in for a killing strike, the brave hobbit leaped from Landroval's back onto the fell beast's neck, sting driving deep between the creature's shoulder blades. The beast's shriek of agony sent it spiraling away, its rider struggling to regain control. "Sam!" Frodo cried out in anguish, thinking his friend lost forever. But the hobbit's courage had inspired others. Aragorn, seeing Sam's example, drew his sword and prepared to follow suit. "If we cannot outfight them," he called to the others, "perhaps we can outbrave them." Yet even as they fought with desperate valor, the reality of their situation became clear. The defenses of the Black Gate were simply too strong, too well prepared. For every enemy they defeated, 10 more took its place. The very air seemed thick with arrows and spears, while the ground below bristled with war machines, ready to bring them down if they flew too low. "We must retreat," Gwaihir called out, his voice heavy with defeat. "This assault was doomed from the start. We are too few against too many." "No," Frodo shouted back, the ring's weight seeming to pull at his very soul. "We're so close. Mount Doom is barely a day's flight from here." But wisdom prevailed over desperation. As another volley of ballista bolts screamed past their formation, Landroval made the decision for all of them. "Brother is right," he said grimly. "We withdraw now, or we die here, uselessly." The retreat was almost as perilous as the battle itself. The fell beasts pursued them relentlessly, harrying their flanks and seeking to cut off their escape. Only Gwaihir's superior speed and the eagle's intimate knowledge of air currents allowed them to gradually outpace their pursuers. They flew north along the borders of Mordor, seeking shelter in the rough country where the Ash Mountains met the borders of Rhovanion. Behind them, the sky above the Black Gate was still black with circling enemies, while signal fires blazed from tower to tower, spreading word of their assault across all of Mordor. As evening approached, they were forced to land in a desolate valley where stunted trees offered some concealment from watching eyes. The cost of their failed assault was immediately apparent. Meneldor's wounds were grievous, and he could barely stand without support. Aragorn bore several arrow wounds, though none were mortal. Even Sam, miraculously, had managed to regain his place on Landroval's back, though his clothes were torn and blooded. "How many did we lose?" Frodo asked quietly, as they huddled in the gathering darkness. "None of us," Landroval replied, "but 3 of the wild eagles who joined us at Edoras fell to the Nazgul. Good birds who answered the call to freedom and paid the ultimate price." The mood was grim as they assessed their situation. The direct assault on the Black Gate had failed utterly, revealing the true extent of Sauron's preparations. Worse, their presence was now known throughout Mordor, eliminating any hope of stealth or surprise. "Perhaps we should have listened to the doubters," Gwaihir said, heavily, the battle fury fading as exhaustion and shame crept back into his voice. Perhaps the ground approach was the wiser choice after all. "No," Aragorn said firmly, wincing as he bound his wounded arm. We have learned something valuable today. Sauron has concentrated his greatest defenses at the traditional approaches: the Black Gate, the Tower of Cirith Ungol, the passes through the Efelduth. But what of the less guarded routes? You speak of the eastern approach? Landrevel asked, through the Sea of Nurnen and the slave lands of Nirn. Precisely. Sauron expects attack from the west, from Gondor and Rohan. But who would think to approach Mount Doom from the east, through his own heartland? Meneldor, despite his wounds, managed a weak laugh. It has the virtue of being completely mad. No sane commander would attempt such a route. Then perhaps, Sam said thoughtfully, it's exactly what we need to do. Sometimes the maddest plan is the wisest one. As they planned their desperate gambit, the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over Middle-earth since the creation of the world. Among them, Erendil's ship sailed its eternal course, bearing the Silmaril that had once inspired hope in the darkest hours. Their assault on the Black Gate had failed, but their mission continued. Somewhere beyond the eastern borders of Mordor lay Mount Doom, and the fires where the ring must be destroyed. The path ahead was darker and more dangerous than any they had yet faced, but it was still a path. And as long as that path remained open, hope endured, however faint, however desperate, however slim the chance of success might be. The Eagles of Manwë had tasted defeat at the Black Gate, but they were not broken. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, and perhaps new opportunities. The quest for Mount Doom continued, even if it led through the very heart of the enemy's realm. In the distance, the fires of Orodruin painted the eastern sky with an ominous glow. Their destination waited, as it had waited for age upon age, for someone brave enough to cast the ring into its fires, that someone might yet prove to be a small hobbit and his faithful companions, carried on the wings of eagles who refused to surrender to despair. Chapter 9. The Eastern Path. The eastern lands of Mordor spread below them like a festering wound upon the earth. Where the western borders were guarded by great fortresses and armies, here lay the productive heart of Sauron's realm. Vast slave farms stretching to the horizon, worked by the broken remnants of free peoples who had fallen under the Shadow's dominion. The Sea of Nurnen glittered like a sheet of tarnished silver in the morning light, its shores lined with processing plants and storage facilities that fed Sauron's war machine. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, and the air itself seemed poisoned with the stench of industry and suffering. "Look there," Legolas called from his position on Landrevel, his keen eyes picking out details that escaped the others. "The fields are full of workers, but see how they move. Like the walking dead, without hope or purpose, save what their masters impose upon them." Frodo's heart ached as he witnessed the scope of the suffering below. Thousands upon thousands of enslaved men, elves, and other free folk toiled in the black soil, growing crops that would feed orc armies and fuel Sauron's expansion. Their bent backs and shuffling steps spoke of years of torment, of spirits broken beyond any hope of repair. "We could help them," Sam said quietly, his voice tight with emotion. "Drop down there and free as many as we could carry." "And doom our mission," Aragorn replied heavily, "as well as ensuring that those we cannot save face even worse punishment for our interference." The moral weight of their choice pressed down upon them all. Here were innocents crying out for salvation, yet their greater duty demanded they pass by without action. It was a choice that would haunt them all, regardless of the outcome of their quest. But even as they debated, new dangers revealed themselves. From towers scattered throughout the slave lands, great mirrors began to flash in coordinated patterns, a communication network more sophisticated than anything they had imagined. Each signal was immediately answered by another, creating a web of surveillance that covered every league of Mordor's eastern territories. "Palantiri," Gwaihir said suddenly, his voice strained as he fought against the ring's ever-stronger whispers. "The seeing stones direct their watchers. Every movement, every shadow that crosses the land is noted and reported." Even as he spoke, the great mirrors began to turn in their direction. Though they flew high above the range of most ground-based weapons, there was no concealment from the unblinking eyes that tracked their passage across the sky. "They see us," Meneldor confirmed grimly. Despite his wounds, the young eagle had insisted on continuing the mission, though his flight was labored and painful to watch. Signal fires spread word of our position ahead of our advance. Below them, the slave workers had stopped their labors to stare upward. Some pointed with expressions of wonder. Perhaps they had never seen eagles before, or perhaps they recognized in these great birds some symbol of the freedom they had lost. But their overseers were quick to restore order, whips cracking as the wretches were driven back to their tasks. It was then that Gwaihir suffered his worst episode yet. The Windlord's flight suddenly became erratic as the ring's corruption reached new depths. His golden eyes went completely black, and he began to mutter in a voice not his own. "Yes, precious, yes. The slaves understand. They know who should rule them. Take the ring, and all the broken things can be made whole again. Take it, and bring order to this chaos." "Sam!" Frodo called urgently. "The ring, take it!" Without hesitation, the brave hobbit reached across from Landraval's back as the two eagles flew close together. His small hands fumbled with the chain around Frodo's neck, fighting against the wind, and Gwaihir's increasingly violent movements. "Give it to us!" Gwaihir shrieked, his voice now completely alien. "The precious belongs to the Sky Lords. We will rule from the clouds, and all the earth shall bow before us." The great eagle's talons lashed out, barely missing Sam as the hobbit struggled to secure the ring around his own neck. The moment the golden band settled against Sam's chest, Gwaihir's madness seemed to lessen slightly, though his eyes remained dark and his breathing labored. I can think again," the Windlord gasped. "But the whispers grow stronger with each moment we remain in this accursed land. How much farther to Mount Doom?" "Perhaps 50 leagues," Aragorn estimated, consulting the rough maps they had acquired. "But see there, more signal fires blaze ahead of us. They are preparing something." What they were preparing became clear as they crested a line of low hills. Between them and the distant peak of Mount Doom lay not open country, but a vast military encampment. Tens of thousands of orcs, uruks, and worse creatures were assembled in perfect formation, their weapons and armor gleaming despite the hazy air. "An army," Landroval observed unnecessarily. "They mass for the great war to come." "Or to stop us," Meneldor added grimly. "See how their formations face the sky as much as the land? They expect aerial attack." It was Aragorn's ranger skills that saved them from blundering into the next trap. His keen eyes spotted the concealed positions among the rocky outcroppings ahead, ballista nests and archer platforms positioned to create a killing field for anything approaching Mount Doom from the east. "They have learned from our assault on the Black Gate," he warned. "The traditional approaches are all blocked. We cannot reach the Samath Naur by any direct route." As if summoned by their despair, new allies appeared from the eastern mountains. Wild eagles, fierce and proud, soared up from hidden eyries to join their formation. Their leader, an ancient female whose feathers were silver with age, spoke in the formal tones of the mountain lords. "We are Airy Queen Sulwen and her people," she declared. Word of your quest has reached even our remote fastnesses. We offer our wings in service of the light." "How many are you?" Gwaihir asked, hope flickering in his dark eyes. 70, Lord of the Western Winds. Not enough to break armies, but perhaps enough to create confusion when the moment comes. Their numbers had grown, but so had the magnitude of their challenge. As they circled at the edge of visibility, studying the defenses around Mount Doom, the true scope of Sauron's preparations became clear. The lonely mountain stood at the center of a web of fortifications, its slopes crawling with guards and weapon emplacements. "The traditional entrance to the Samath Naur is sealed," Sulwen reported after a careful reconnaissance. "Great stones have been rolled across the eastern door, and Nazgul guard the sealed entrance." "Then we must find another way," Frodo said firmly, though the ring's weight around Sam's neck seemed to be affecting his own thoughts. The distance from the ring brought no relief. If anything, it made him feel incomplete, as if part of his very soul was missing. It was then that a familiar, hated voice reached them from below. Gollum had not given up his pursuit. Indeed, he seemed to have acquired allies among Sauron's servants. Orc wolf riders followed his lead as he scrambled across the rocky terrain, his pale eyes fixed hungrily on the sky. "Clever birds think they can fly to safety," Gollum hissed, his voice somehow carrying despite the distance. "But Sméagol knows the secret ways. Yes, precious. Sméagol can show the flying thieves paths they never dreamed of, but only if they gives us our precious back." "He offers bargains even now," Sam observed grimly, "as if we'd trust him after everything." "Perhaps we should listen," Frodo said quietly, and the others looked at him in alarm. The separation from the ring was clearly affecting the hobbit's judgment, making him vulnerable to suggestions he would normally reject. "No," Aragorn said firmly. "Gollum serves only his own hunger for the ring. Any path he showed us would lead to betrayal." As the day wore toward evening, they were forced to make the most desperate decision yet. The traditional approaches to Mount Doom were all blocked, the surrounding territories swarmed with enemies, and their own company was fracturing under the ring's terrible influence. "There is one possibility," Sulwen said, reluctantly. "A direct vertical assault on the mountain's peak. No earthbound army could stop such an approach. But the Nazgul would be free to attack without interference," Gwaihir finished. "And the crater itself is said to be a place of such evil that even we eagles fear to approach it." "It's madness," Menildor said bluntly. "All of this has been madness," Sam replied, adjusting the ring's chain around his neck. The weight of it was beginning to affect even his stalwart spirit, filling his thoughts with visions of gardens that could span continents if only he had the power to plant them. But sometimes madness is the only sane choice left. As night fell over the eastern lands of Mordor, they made their final preparations. The vertical assault would be their last gambit, a desperate plunge from the heights of the sky directly into the fires of Mount Doom itself. They would have to evade the Nazgul, survive the mountain's evil influence, and somehow reach the Samath Naur, while carrying a ring that drove even the noblest souls to madness. The odds were impossible, the dangers unthinkable, and failure would mean not just their own deaths, but the triumph of darkness over all Middle-earth. Yet, as they looked toward the distant glow of Orodruin, each of them felt a strange sense of peace. They had come farther than anyone had thought possible. They had carried the ring to the very borders of its birthplace, despite every obstacle Sauron could place in their path. Whether they succeeded or failed in the final assault, they had proven that even the greatest evil could be challenged by those brave enough to try. The final test awaited them in the fires of Mount Doom. Tomorrow, they would either save the world or die in the attempt. There was no middle ground, No retreat, no alternative but victory or death. The quest for the ring's destruction had reached its end at last. Chapter 10. The Fires of Mount Doom. Mount Doom rose before them like a monument to evil itself, its peak wreathed in smoke and fire that painted the dawn sky the color of blood. The great volcano's slopes crawled with orc patrols and weapon emplacements, but at the dizzying heights where the eagles flew, the defenses grew thin. Here, in the realm of fire and ash, even Sauron's servants feared to tread. The vertical assault began at first light, with Sulwen's wild eagles providing cover, while Gwaihir, Landroval, and Meneldor climbed toward the crater's rim. The air grew thick with volcanic fumes that burned their lungs and stung their eyes, while the heat radiating from the mountain's core made every wingbeat a trial of endurance. "There!" Aragorn called out, pointing toward a narrow ledge just below the crater's edge. "We can land there and approach the Sammath Naur on foot." But even as they angled toward the precarious landing site, disaster struck their formation. The ring's proximity to its place of creation had driven its corruption to unprecedented levels, and Gwaihir finally succumbed completely to its malevolent influence. "Mine!" the Wind Lord shrieked, his voice no longer recognizably his own. "The precious returns to its master, and its master claims what is his." The great eagle suddenly wheeled away from the landing site, his golden eyes now pools of darkness as he sought to carry Sam and the ring away from the mountain entirely. His mind, shattered by days of fighting the ring's corruption, could no longer distinguish between completing the mission and claiming its ultimate prize. "Brother, no!" Landroval cried out in anguish. The brown eagle threw himself at Gwaihir with desperate fury, and the two greatest of their kind grappled in midair above the very fires of Mount Doom. Their battle sent both eagles spiraling dangerously close to the crater's molten depths. "Sam!" Frodo called desperately as he watched his friend being carried toward certain doom. "Jump!" The brave hobbit needed no further encouragement. With a courage that would have made his old gaffer weep with pride, Sam leaped from Gwaihir's back as the eagles fought, trusting to luck and Meneldor's quick reflexes to save him from a fiery death. The young eagle, despite his wounds, caught Sam just yards above the lava flows, pulling up with such force that both nearly blacked out from the strain. They crashed hard onto the narrow ledge where Frodo and Aragorn waited, the ring's chain tangling around Sam's neck as he rolled to safety. Above them, the battle between the Eagle brothers continued with increasing desperation. Landroval sought only to restrain Gwaihir, to save his brother from the ring's ultimate corruption, but the Wind Lord fought with the fury of absolute madness. "We must go," Aragorn said grimly, helping Sam to his feet. "The Sammath Naur lies just ahead, through that dark opening. But the eagles cannot follow us into those narrow tunnels." Frodo looked up at the aerial battle with tears in his eyes. "Leave them? After everything they've done for us?" "We complete the mission," Aragorn replied firmly. "It's what Gwaihir would want, what the real Gwaihir would want. I'll coordinate the aerial defense from here. You and Sam must reach the cracks of doom." As the two hobbits approached the dark entrance to the Chambers of Fire, the very air seemed to thicken with malevolence. The ring around Sam's neck grew so hot it burned against his skin, while whispers in languages older than the Shire filled their minds with promises of power and threats of doom. The Sammath Naur stretched before them, like a throat leading into the world's burning heart. The tunnels carved from living rock were too narrow for even the smallest eagle, forcing the hobbits to continue alone into the mountain's fiery depths. Behind them, the sounds of aerial battle echoed from the crater's mouth as their friends fought to keep the passage clear. "The walls," Sam whispered in wonder and horror. Look at the walls, Mr. Frodo. Ancient runes covered every surface, glowing with their own inner fire, the very words of making that Sauron had used to forge the Ring of Power. In this place, the barrier between thought and reality grew thin, and both hobbits could feel the weight of ages pressing down upon their minds. It was then that a familiar figure emerged from the shadows ahead, Gollum, who had somehow infiltrated the mountain during the chaos of the eagle battle. His pale eyes gleamed with desperate hunger as he blocked their path to the cracks of doom. "At last," he hissed, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow tunnels. "At last Sméagol comes home, comes to where the precious was born. Give it to us now, thieves. Give us our precious." "No, Sméagol," Frodo said firmly, though his voice shook with the strain of resisting the ring's power. "This is where it ends. Where all of it ends." But even as he spoke, Frodo could feel his resolve weakening. Here, in the very heart of the ring's creation, its power was overwhelming. The golden band seemed to sing to him, promising dominion over all Middle-earth, the power to heal every wound and right every wrong. "Why destroy me?" the ring whispered in his mind. "Think of what we could accomplish together. No more war, no more suffering. Perfect order under perfect rule." Sam watched in growing alarm as his master's steps slowed, then stopped entirely just yards from the cracks of doom. The chasm of fire lay before them, the very fissure where Sauron had forged the ring and where it must be destroyed. But Frodo stood frozen, his hand moving unconsciously toward the chain around Sam's neck. "I can't," Frodo whispered, his eyes reflecting the fires before him. "I can't destroy it, Sam. Look what it could do for us. Look how we could help everyone." "No, Mr. Frodo," Sam said firmly, backing away from his friend's reaching hands. "I've seen what that thing does to folks. It doesn't help. It only corrupts and destroys." It was then that Gollum struck. The wretched creature had been waiting for just such a moment, when the ring-bearer's guard was down and the ring's corruption was at its peak. He leaped at Sam with desperate fury, his thin hands clawing at the chain that held Middle-earth's fate. The struggle that followed was brief but vicious. Sam fought with all the strength in his hobbit frame, but Gollum had been driven beyond sanity by decades of loss and longing. As they grappled at the very edge of the cracks of doom, the chain snapped, sending the ring spinning through the air. "My precious!" Gollum shrieked, diving after the golden band with complete disregard for his own safety. He caught it just as he plummeted over the edge, his cry of triumph turning to a scream of terror as he fell into the molten depths below. The ring, reunited at last with its place of creation, blazed with terrible light as it sank into the fires that had given it birth. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Mount Doom convulsed, as if struck by the fist of a god, its foundations shaking as the power that had sustained it for 3 ages was suddenly torn away. Lava fountains erupted from cracks in the chamber floor, while the very air seemed to catch fire. "Run!" Sam shouted, grabbing the stunned Frodo by the arm. "The whole mountain's coming apart." They fled through the collapsing tunnels as Mount Doom began its death throes. Behind them, the Sammath Nahor filled with molten rock, sealing forever the chamber where the greatest evil of the age had finally been unmade. As they stumbled from the mountain's interior, they found Aragorn waiting with Meneldur, the young eagle's wounds forgotten in the desperate need for immediate evacuation. Above them, the battle between Gwaihir and Landroval had ended, not in victory for either, but in the sudden clarity that came when the ring's power was broken forever. The Windlord hung in the air like a bird struck by lightning, his golden eyes slowly clearing as the corruption that had tormented him for days finally lifted. What have I done?" he whispered, staring at his brother with dawning horror. You fought, Landroval replied simply. You fought harder than anyone should have to fight, and you endured. The darkness was not your fault, brother. But there was no time for reunion or forgiveness. Mount Doom was erupting with volcanic fury that would reshape the landscape for miles around. Great gouts of lava shot skyward while the mountain's peak began to collapse in on itself, creating a hellish maelstrom that threatened to consume everything in its path. "Everyone on!" Gwaihir commanded, his voice hoarse, but finally his own again. "We leave now, or we don't leave at all." The evacuation was a nightmare of fire and falling stone. Sulwin's wild eagles swooped down to assist, carrying the hobbits and Aragorn away from the collapsing mountain as Orodruin's death screams echoed across all of Mordor. The heat was so intense that even at their great height, the eagles' feathers began to smoulder. As they climbed toward clearer air, Frodo looked back at the destruction they were leaving behind. Mount Doom was collapsing in on itself, its fires extinguished forever, as the power that had sustained them was broken. In the distance, he could see the Tower of Barad-dûr beginning to sway and crumble as Sauron's strength failed at last. "It's done," he said quietly, tears streaming down his soot-stained face. "It's finally done. The ring was destroyed. Mount Doom was dying, and across all of Mordor, the forces of darkness reeled as their master's power was broken forever. The quest that had begun in the fair valley of Rivendell had ended in fire and fury, but it had ended in victory. As the eagles bore them away from the devastation, flying toward the clean air and open sky beyond Mordor's borders, each of them knew that Middle-earth would never be the same. The Third Age was ending in volcanic fire and the screams of a dying mountain. But from those ashes, a new age of freedom would be born. The ring was gone, Sauron's power was broken, and the eagles of Manwë had proven that even the smallest folk, supported by the greatest hearts, could change the world forever. Chapter 11. The Scouring of the Sky. The shockwave from Mount Doom's eruption rippled across Middle-earth like the death cry of a god. From their desperate flight, away from the collapsing volcano, the eagles and their passengers felt the very air tremble as seismic forces reshaped the landscape below. Great cracks appeared in the earth, swallowing entire orc encampments, while ash clouds billowed skyward in columns that seemed to pierce the heavens themselves. "Look there!" Legolas called out, his keen eyes fixed on the distant spire of Barad-dûr. Even at their great distance, they could see Sauron's mighty tower swaying like a tree in a gale, its foundations crumbling as the power that had sustained it for millennia was torn away forever. The Dark Tower's fall was not swift. It toppled with terrible grandeur, each stone crying out as it plummeted toward earth. When the dust finally settled, nothing remained but rubble, where once the greatest fortress of evil had stood, sentinel over Mordor. But more dramatic still was the immediate collapse of Sauron's armies. Below them, the vast orc host that had been marching toward the borders of Gondor suddenly stopped, as if struck by an invisible blow. Without their master's will to drive them, the creatures of darkness turned on each other in mindless fury, or simply fled screaming into the wasteland. "The slaves!" Sam called out urgently, pointing toward the work camps they had passed on their eastward journey. "Look at the slaves, Mr. Frodo." Across the farmlands of Nirn, a miracle was unfolding. The broken people who had toiled under Sauron's whip were rising from their labors, their chains falling away as the dark magic that had bound them dissolved. Some fell to their knees in wonder, others raised their arms toward the sky, and many simply wept as they realized that their long nightmare was finally over. "We must help them," Aragorn said immediately. "Those people will need aid to reach safety before the volcanic ash makes this entire region uninhabitable." But even as they began to descend toward the fleeing masses, new danger emerged from the chaos. The Nazgul, driven to final desperation by their master's fall, launched one last coordinated assault against the eagles. The 9 fell beasts rose from the smoke and confusion like demons from the abyss, their riders shrieking with fury and despair. "They know it's over," Gwaihir observed, his voice hoarse but finally free of the ring's corruption. "But they will not go gently into the darkness." The Witch King led the final charge, his fell beast's wings torn and bleeding from the volcanic debris, his crown of iron twisted and cracked. Behind him came his 8 companions, no longer the terrible lords of shadow they had once been, but desperate wraiths clinging to the last remnants of their fading power. Landroval took command of the aerial defense with natural authority, his voice carrying clearly over the din of battle. "Formation flying. Protect the wounded. Drive them back toward the fires." The sky above eastern Mordor became a battlefield unlike any seen since the War of Wrath itself. Dozens of eagles, both the companions who had flown from Rivendell and Sulwyn's wild mountain folk, engaged the Nazgul in a dance of death high above the collapsing realm below. But this time, the advantage belonged to the forces of light. The Nazgul's power was broken, along with their masters, their fell beasts weakened by wounds and exhaustion. One by one they fell from the sky, some struck down by talon and beak, others simply fading away as the darkness that sustained them was consumed by greater fires. The Witch King lasted longest, his hatred giving him strength even as his physical form began to dissolve. He dove at Gwaihir with suicidal fury, seeking to drag the Windlord down with him into oblivion. But the great eagle, freed at last from the ring's corruption, met the attack with all his ancestral pride and power. "For the Shire!" Sam cried out as he watched the final duel. "For Mr. Frodo and the Ring-Bearers!" "For all free peoples!" Aragorn added, his sword raised toward the sky. The Witch King's shriek of defeat echoed across the wasteland as Gwaihir's talons found their mark. The greatest of the Nazgul crumbled to dust that was scattered by the volcanic winds, his crown of iron falling to earth with a sound like the closing of a tomb. With their lord's destruction, the last of the 9 faded into nothingness, leaving only empty saddles on fell beasts that collapsed from exhaustion and wounds. The sky belonged once again to the eagles and to all who loved freedom and light. Below them, the evacuation of Sauron's former slaves continued with desperate urgency. The volcanic ash was spreading rapidly, turning day to twilight across hundreds of square miles. Sulwyn and her mountain eagles dove repeatedly into the chaos, carrying out those too weak to flee on foot, while Aragorn coordinated rescue efforts from Meneldor's back. "There!" Legolas called, pointing toward a group of prisoners who had been chained in an exposed courtyard. "Elves from Mirkwood, by their bearing. They've been captives for months, perhaps years." The rescue missions continued throughout the day as ash fell like grey snow across the dying realm. Every eagle pushed themselves beyond exhaustion, making trip after trip to carry survivors to safety beyond the Ephel Dúth. By evening, they had saved perhaps 1,000 souls from the devastation, a small number compared to the multitudes who had suffered under Sauron's rule. But each life was precious beyond measure. As night fell over, what had once been the heart of darkness, they gathered on a rocky outcrop beyond the range of the falling ash. Mount Doom glowed like a dying ember in the distance. Its peak collapsed, and its fires dimmed forever. The air was clean here, free of the sulphur and despair that had poisoned Mordor for so long. Is it truly over? Sam asked quietly, as Frodo tended his burns with water from their dwindling supplies. The brave hobbit had suffered more than any of them in their escape from the mountain, his hands and face marked by the fires that had consumed the ring. "The ring is gone," Frodo replied, his voice carrying a peace that had been absent for months. "Sauron is defeated. Mount Doom will never again forge instruments of evil. Yes, Sam, it's truly over." Gwaihir approached them hesitantly, his great head bowed with shame. "Ring-bearer," he said formally, "I must ask your forgiveness. In my madness, I nearly betrayed everything we fought for. I am not worthy of the trust you placed in me." Frodo looked up at the great eagle, with eyes full of understanding rather than accusation. "The ring corrupted you, as it corrupted all who came near it. That was its nature, its purpose. But you fought against that corruption longer and harder than anyone could have asked. Without your strength and courage, we never would have reached Mount Doom at all. You saved Middle-earth," Sam added firmly. "All of you eagles did. Don't let shame cloud that victory." As they prepared to begin their journey homeward, refugees from Mordor's collapse streamed past their camp, former slaves heading west toward Gondor and Rohan, where they hoped to find sanctuary and new lives. Many stopped to thank the eagles who had carried them to safety, their eyes bright with tears of gratitude. "Look at them," Aragorn said quietly. "Free people walking under stars they thought they would never see again. This is why we flew into darkness, not just to destroy the ring, but to restore hope to those who had lost it." The journey back to Gondor would take several days, even by wing. They flew through clear skies above lands that were already beginning to heal from the shadow's touch. Grass seemed greener, water ran clearer, and even the very air felt lighter without Sauron's malevolent presence pressing down upon the world. Along their route, they encountered other signs of the enemy's defeat. Orc armies scattered like leaves before the wind, their commanders dead or fled, and their ranks broken by infighting. Strongholds that had served the darkness for centuries stood empty, their garrisons abandoned or destroyed by their former captives. "The war is won," Meneldur observed, as they passed over a burning orc encampment. "Though the work of building peace will take much longer." "That is work for others," Gwaihir replied. "We have done what we came to do. Now let those with wisdom greater than ours decide how best to heal the wounds that evil has left upon the world." As they flew westward through the clean air above a liberated land, each of them carried the knowledge that they had witnessed the end of an age. The third age of Middle-earth was ending, not in slow decline, but in triumph, the triumph of small folk over great evil, of friendship over corruption, of hope over despair. Behind them, Mount Doom smouldered in defeat, its fires dimmed forever. Ahead lay Minas Tirith and the other great cities of the West, where news of their victory would bring joy beyond measure. The quest was complete, the ring was destroyed, and Middle-earth was free. The eagles had proven that even the mightiest evil could be overcome by courage, friendship, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of others. Their names would be remembered in song and story for as long as the world endured, the Wind Lord and his companions who had carried the ring to its destruction and ushered in a new age of peace. The sky stretched before them, bright with promise and hope, as they flew toward whatever new adventures awaited in the world they had helped to save. Chapter 12. Return of the Eagles. The white towers of Minas Tirith rose before them like a beacon of hope in the dawn light, their stone walls gleaming with new-found brilliance now that the shadow had been lifted from the world. As the great eagles approached the City of Kings, Horns sounded from every watchtower, not in alarm but in jubilation. The garrison had seen the dark clouds over Mordor dissipate, had felt the oppressive weight of Sauron's malice suddenly lift, and they knew that victory had come at last. "Look how the city shines," Sam observed in wonder. "It's like someone polished every stone while we were away." Indeed, Minas Tirith seemed transformed. The very air sparkled with clarity, and the banners flying from the citadel's highest tower, the banner of Gondor, and beside it, the newly raised standard of the returned king, snapped proudly in a wind that no longer carried the taint of Mordor's fumes. They landed in the court of the fountain, where Prince Imrahil and the remaining lords of Gondor waited with barely contained excitement. Word of the ring's destruction had spread swiftly, carried by refugees from Mordor and confirmed by the obvious collapse of Sauron's power. But the sight of the actual heroes of the quest brought tears to many proud eyes. "The ring-bearers return," Imrahil proclaimed formally, though his voice shook with emotion. "All honor to the eagles who carried our salvation on their wings." Aragorn dismounted from Meneldor's back with grave dignity, but his grey eyes sparkled with joy as he surveyed the assembled lords and citizens. "The quest is complete," he announced, his ranger's voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "The One Ring has been destroyed, Sauron is defeated, and Middle-earth is free." The cheer that rose from the assembled crowd could be heard throughout the 7 levels of the city, but it was Gwaihir who commanded the most attention as the great eagle approached Frodo with measured steps, his golden eyes clear and bright once more. "Ring-bearer," the Wind Lord said formally, "I must speak words that have weighed upon my heart since the moment of our victory. In the darkness of the quest, I was not myself. The ring's corruption turned me against the very mission I had sworn to protect. Can you forgive the betrayal of one who should have been your steadfast guardian?" Frodo, still bearing the marks of their ordeal in Mount Doom, stepped forward without hesitation. "Lord Gwaihir, you carried me farther and faster toward Mount Doom than any other creature in Middle-earth could have done. Yes, the ring affected you, as it affected all of us. But you fought against that influence with courage beyond measure, and when the final test came, you helped us reach our destination. There is nothing to forgive, only gratitude to express." The formal reconciliation moved many witnesses to tears, but it was Sam who broke the solemn mood with his characteristically practical observation. "Besides, Mr. Gwaihir, if you hadn't fought so hard against that nasty thing's influence, we'd never have learned how dangerous it was to keep it so close for so long. Your struggle saved us all." It was then that Gandalf appeared, striding through the crowd with his white robes gleaming in the morning sun. The wizard's face bore lines of concern and exhaustion. He had spent the past week coordinating defenses and preparing for the worst, but his eyes shone with pride and wonder as he beheld the successful questers. "So," he said with a slight smile, "the aerial approach proved effective after all. I confess, when Gwaihir first agreed to your desperate plan, I feared we were trading stealth for speed unwisely. But the results speak for themselves. A quest that might have taken months was completed in less than a week, and Sauron's preparations were insufficient to stop you." "The eagles deserve all credit," Aragorn said firmly. "Without their courage and sacrifice, the ring might have remained in enemy hands for years, while Sauron's power grew beyond all challenging." Over the following days, Minas Tirith became the center of a transformation unlike any seen since the founding of Gondor. Representatives arrived from every free people: elves from Rivendell and Lothlorien, dwarves from Erebor and the Iron Hills, rangers from the wild lands, and riders from Rohan. All came to witness Aragorn's coronation and to establish new alliances in the age of peace that was dawning. The recognition ceremony for the Eagles was held in the Citadel's Great Hall, with representatives of every nation present to witness the historic moment. Gwaihir, Landroval, and Meneldor were formally named as Friends of Gondor, while Sulwen and her mountain eagles received the gratitude of all free peoples for their role in the final victory. From this day forward, Aragorn declared in his first official act as King Elessar, "Let it be known that the great eagles of Middle-earth are welcome in all lands under my protection. Let their eyries be safe from harm, their hunting grounds be respected, and their friendship be treasured above gold." Sam found himself quite overwhelmed by his new status as Guardian of the Ring in its final hour, and Friend of Eagles. Nobles and commoners alike sought to hear his account of the quest, though he remained characteristically modest about his role. "I just did what anyone would do for a friend," he insisted, whenever pressed for details of his heroism. Mr. Frodo needed help, and the Eagles needed someone to tend their passengers. Nothing more complicated than that. But privately, Sam confessed to Frodo that the experience had changed him profoundly. "I've seen the world from the clouds themselves, Mr. Frodo. I've watched the sun rise over lands I never knew existed. How can a fellow go back to just tending gardens after seeing all that?" "You don't have to just tend gardens, Sam," Frodo replied gently. "Though I think any garden you tend will be the richer for what you've learned about the wider world." Frodo himself struggled more than the others with the aftermath of their victory. The ring's corruption, combined with the terror and wonder of their aerial journey, had left marks on his spirit that would not easily heal. He found crowds difficult to bear, loud noises made him flinch, and even the sight of flying birds sometimes brought back unwelcome memories of their desperate flight through hostile skies. "The healing will take time," Gandalf counseled him during one of their private conversations. "You bore a burden that no mortal was meant to carry, and you did so with courage beyond measure. But such wounds run deep, and there may come a day when only the peace of the undying lands can offer you the rest you need." "Not yet," Frodo replied. "There is too much to be done here first. The refugees from Mordor need aid, the lands need healing, and I want to help rebuild what the Shadow destroyed." The political discussions that followed the celebration were complex and far-reaching. The destruction of Sauron's power had created a vacuum that needed to be filled carefully and wisely. But perhaps the most significant development was the formal alliance established between the Eagles and the kingdoms of men. "For too long, our peoples have lived in isolation from each other," Gwaihir declared before the assembled council. "The quest has shown us that our fates are intertwined more closely than we ever imagined. Let us build a future where eagles and men work together for the good of all Middle-earth." Practical arrangements were quickly established. The Eagles would provide swift communication between distant cities, assist in rescue efforts during natural disasters, and serve as scouts for threats that might arise. In return, the kingdoms of men would protect Eagle territories from encroachment and provide aid when the Eagles themselves faced difficulties. As autumn deepened toward winter, the time came for the quest companions to begin their separate journeys home. Sam prepared to return to the Shire, though he carried with him a new understanding of his place in the wider world. The simple gardener who had departed from Rivendell had become a hero whose name would be remembered in song and story. "You'll visit, won't you?" Sam asked the Eagles as he prepared for departure. "The Shire's a fair country, and I know some folk there would love to meet the great birds who saved Middle-earth." "We will visit, Sam Gamgee," Gwaihir promised, "and when the time comes for longer journeys, know that the eagles remember their friends. The parting was emotional, but not final. All of them understood that their bonds forged in fire and sky would endure for as long as any of them lived. Even Frodo, despite his inner struggles, smiled as he watched Sam depart for the Shire aboard a specially constructed platform, carried by 2 of Sulwen's mountain eagles. "He'll revolutionize gardening," Frodo predicted. "Probably have the Shire's flowers arranged in patterns visible only from the air." As winter settled over Middle-earth, the great work of rebuilding continued. The eagles proved invaluable in these efforts, carrying supplies to distant settlements and providing communication links that allowed the scattered peoples to coordinate their efforts. The alliance that had been forged in the desperate urgency of the quest became the foundation for a new age of cooperation and prosperity. Years would pass before Frodo's wounds were healed enough for him to seek the ultimate peace of the Undying Lands, and when that time came, it would be the eagles who provided escort for the ship at the Grey Havens. From their great height, they would watch the white ship sail toward the sunset, carrying the ring-bearer to well-deserved rest. But on this day, as the first snows began to fall on the white towers of Minas Tirith, the future stretched bright with promise. The ring was destroyed, the shadow was lifted, and a new age had begun. An age where the bonds between earth and sky, between the ground-dwelling peoples and the creatures of the air, would grow ever stronger. In the archives of Gondor, scribes worked to record the full tale of the quest, ensuring that future generations would remember how a small hobbit, a faithful friend, a wise ranger, and the great eagles of Middle-earth had changed the world forever. The age of eagles and men had begun, built on foundations of courage, friendship, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. The sky stretched endlessly above them, no longer darkened by the shadow, bright with stars that sang of hope and peace. And in that vast expanse, the eagles soared free, guardians of a world they had helped to save, and partners in the great work of building a better tomorrow for all the children of Ilúvatar.